Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto is Ulquiorra. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. Ulquiorra looked at the Ona, watching her face as two fat tears slid down her soft cheeks, dripping from her chin to the dome. He felt a soft tug at his soul as he watched her. He heard something, like a half-forgotten dream, and a faint image appeared in his mind's eye. Ah, yes, a memory. How long had it been since he had thought of his last life? A thin, rakish girl, with short black hair and pale eyes, weeping before him, her hands outstretched, cupping his face, pressing her sobbing lips to his. Whispering, I love you, Naruto-kun? Ulquiorra looked down as he faded. A name drifted out of the darkness. Hyuga Hinata. As he died, a single thought came into his mind. Her heart was right, in my hands. He hadn't seen this coming. Kakashi had written all the reports to show Sasuke as the hero, that he had saved the day every time. Naruto was the fool, the half-wit, the idiot who couldn't control his own power. I, Tsunade, 5th Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, with the agreement of the clan heads, the village council, and the elders, declare you a traitor. You have brought shame and dishonor upon the entire village. You were ordered to capture Sasuke Uchiha and return him to Konoha. Permission was given to use force if necessary. But instead, you attempted to murder him. If Naruto wasn't chained and manacled and he didn't have the damn gag in his mouth, he would have ranted and screamed and hurled abuse at Tsunade. But he wasn't able to. Naruto's face was mauled and scarred, courtesy of Sakura and Kakashi, and breathing hurt him sorely, thanks to the two-point-blank Chidori he had received during his battle with Sasuke. He stared at them from under his eyebrows, his neck bent under the heavy steel collar, his eyes filled with betrayal, hate, and despair. He surrendered peacefully, but you attacked anyway. Eyewitnesses reported it. Sasuke Uchiha was nearly killed by your brutal assault. Your betrayal nearly destroyed the last of the Uchiha clan, and nearly cost Konoha her finest ninja. It is decided that you will be taken from this place and suffer execution 3 days hence, as should have been done when you were a child. The Kyuubi no Yoko is a threat to this village, one that should have been destroyed long ago, and it is clear that you no longer have the will or strength to suppress it. Tsunade stood into the cheers and roars of approval. She waved a hand to the two Anbu members, declaring, "Take the Jinchuriki away. I shall show you true despair, to match my own." The holding cell was large and bare. There were a dozen thick steel bars across the entrance, but there was a small door through them which allowed the guards in. Naruto's wrists were manacled, with long chains attached to the walls, stretching his arms to breaking point. His neck was held in a large collar, attached to a chain to the ceiling, and every time he breathed or moved his neck, the sharp edges cut deep into his skin, causing blood to run down his naked chest. His legs were manacled to the floor, spread out from each other, so that he resembled a 5-pointed star. On the first day, Ibiki Morino and his torture and interrogation squad had entered the cell and had set to work on him. By the time they left, many hours later, his ribs were fractured, one of his eyes was blinded, his skin was burnt, his legs were broken and twisted, and he had more bruises than he could count. Later the same day, Kakashi entered. He walked right up to Naruto, watching him coolly. "Well, Naruto," he said, "anything to say for yourself?" Naruto's one good eye stared back impassively. Kakashi sighed and leant against the nearby wall. "Why did you attack him, Naruto? The objective was clear. You were to bring him back, not kill him. And yet you attacked him. The finest chunin in the village." He looked back up at him sharply. "Was it jealousy?" he asked quietly. Naruto remained obstinately silent, glaring at the ground. He wouldn't give his former sensei the satisfaction of his anger. Kakashi sighed and walked away. "You are a great disappointment to me, Naruto. The worst ninja I ever trained." Naruto watched him retreat, silent as the grave. "I hope you find penitence in your last hours." His friends came that day. Rock Lee, Shino, Shikamaru, Choji, Ino and Kiba were silent, standing in the background as the others sneered and gloated. Sakura insulted him and spat on him, declaring the hate she had felt since they had first formed the team. The other students followed suit, blaming him for the misfortunes of their clans and those who died 13 years before. Finally they all left, Naruto as silent as ever. Then, "Hello, Dobi." Naruto's eye looked up, staring straight into the Sharingan, the only light in the dark cell. He could barely discern Sasuke, only as a dark shape in the pitch blackness. He was mildly surprised to realize they had let him into the cell. Sasuke sneered as Naruto struggled to raise his head, his eye filled with venomous hate. He forced himself to stand upright, but the chains restricted his movements, and he could feel his damaged body click and snap in some places. He glared at Sasuke. Now, Naruto. That's no way to look at the new Uchiha clan head, smirked Sasuke, showing him the ring he wore on his finger. It showed the Uchiha crest on a band of silver and gold. Sasuke punched him clean in the stomach, his eyes livid. Naruto snarled at the pain. Sasuke had gotten stronger. His sealed chakra meant that he hurt all the more. So Sasuke, how come, he asked. Naruto tugged on his chains, making them rattle. Sasuke, understanding, smiled darkly. Kukuku. Allow me to explain. Think about it. I am the last loyal Uchiha. My Sharingan promises Konoha's continued authority over the rest of the world. The village has more need of the Sharingan than the Kyuubi no Yoko. My children and theirs will have the Sharingan, and from that Konoha can conquer all the lands. The council came to me offering a most intriguing proposal. Remain loyal to Konoha, and they will give me all the power I want. They've already begun. He held up the Anbu mask at his side and placed it over his face, but Naruto couldn't discern the image painted on. But they have still more to offer. I might become Hokage. How about I take that dream of yours as well? Naruto snorted and leant forward again, ignoring Sasuke. Did you come here for a reason, or just to spout shit, a Hondara? Hissed Naruto. He was going to die. He wasn't going to be polite now. Sasuke smirked again, his Sharingan livid. Yes, the village has decided to make me your executioner. They thought it only fitting as the head of the Uchiha clan and the one you nearly murdered. From you, I will gain the Mangekyo Sharingan, and become even stronger, all thanks to you. He turned and left, leaving the cell dark again. Naruto couldn't help it. He giggled. He giggled like a child, his voice rising. Chortling, laughing, and guffawing. He heard the guards and Sasuke stop still as they listened to the laughter of a madman. The cerulean eye gleamed like fire. The next few hours were silent and still. As the sun set and the moon arose, a storm struck the village. Freezing rain struck the outside of the prison and seeped through the wall, the cold chilling his blood. The second day began warm and dry, but the inside of Naruto's cell was still cold. He heard the tramp of feet approaching the cell. Here he is. Be quick, hissed one voice, a guard, nervously. Yes, said a second voice, quietly. He continued looking down, his eye focused on the ground. NN Naruto-kun? Stuttered the second voice. The voice was sad and heavy, panting with fear and worry. Naruto looked up, fixing his baleful cerulean glare on the bars. The voice whimpered in surprise and sadness upon seeing his ruined body. Who is there? He asked hoarsely. The bars creaked and the small door opened and Hinata stepped inside. Fat tears coursed down her soft face, her eyes wet and shining. She slowly, cautiously walked towards the prisoner. When she was a mere foot away, she stopped and knelt so that Naruto looked down at her. Hinata, what are you doing here? Come to spit at the cornered rat as well? His lips twisted in an insane grin, his eye mad and wild. Hinata looked pained at his words and shook her head worriedly, crying harder. Forgive me, Naruto-kun. Naruto blinked in surprise. No one had said they were sorry, except Rock Lee and the rest of Team 8, and even then indirectly, by their sad faces and the intense airs of self-loathing. He softened somewhat, but his eyes still held the insane gleam. Don't worry, Hinata-chan. It's enough to know that someone doesn't hate me. He smiled at her. Hinata smiled through her tears, her lips quivering. No, Naruto-kun. I came here to tell you something, and if I don't do it now, I'll never get the chance. She started to hyperventilate. Naruto watched her closely, confused and unsure of what was going on. Hinata regained her breath and then said, Naruto-kun, for a long time now, I've. She stopped again, then, scrunching up her face, blurted out, I love you, Naruto-kun. Then dropped her face into her hands and wept. Naruto stood there speechless. He couldn't wrap his mind around Hinata, sweet, innocent, shy, beautiful, gentle. He made the links all in an instant. Her shyness around him, Kiba's and Shino's odd comments about her crush and her unwillingness to ever speak about it. Her shyness about him, her odd mannerisms. Perhaps if I noticed earlier, I might have. I am sorry, Hinata-chan, he whispered. She looked back at him in confusion, then abject depression, her shakes and quivers intensifying. He realized it a moment later. She thought he was saying he didn't feel the same way. If I had known you felt that way, he continued, hoping to save the situation, perhaps I might have. Hinata silenced him by grabbing his cheeks in her hands and kissing him. He was so surprised he couldn't react for a minute, but finally his mind kicked back in and he responded. It was clumsy and messy, but it was sweet. Finally, she pulled back, holding his face in her hands. Whispering, I love you, Naruto-kun. I love you too. And he was surprised to find he meant it. What a fool he had been, wasting his life on the bitch Sakura. Will you wait for me? He asked as footsteps approached. She nodded and kissed him again. I will. Traitor? I've never betrayed anyone, not Konoha, not Aizen-sama, no one. Naruto grinned up at the two Anbu members. No worries, guys. Just help me a bit with the cuffs and everything else will be fine, Datbeo. The two men said nothing, silently removing the chains from the walls to retie to him later at the gallows, though their body language screamed worry. As they dragged him unresisting from the cell and through the prison, the Kyuubi sighed. Well, Kit, it looks like the end is here. Afraid? You? Of course I am. I doubt there is an afterlife for me. And even if there is, all these damn fools who controlled me have pretty much guaranteed it'll be hell. Sorry, Kyuubi, Naruto thought as they were brought into the blinding sunlight, and heard the roar of the crowd. Don't be. Of all the humans I could have died with, I doubt many would be as brave as you, Kit. When you get to paradise or whatever, think of me, Sure, thought Naruto sadly as he realized that, despite the animosity between them, the Kyuubi cared for him in a way, and he would never see or hear him again. Showtime, they thought together, grinning sickly at each other as Naruto was bound between two pillars of stone on the gallows so that he stood as if crucified. The wooden platform was built in directly in the middle of the village square, and to either side were the leaders of the village. In front of him was the entire village, everyone gathered to see the event. Some were on the ground, some on top of the buildings. They were all cheering and laughing, hollering for the death of the demon. A few pelted rotten food and refuse at him. However, in the corner of his vision, atop one of the buildings, a small group huddled, alone. He caught a glimpse of Team 8 and Rock Lee, as well as the Kanemaru Corps and Asuma with his team sitting on the roof together, watching the scene below. He saw Hinata being held by Kurenai, watching him, and he could just about see her shoulders shaking. Tsunade raised her hands for silence. The crowd slowly mumbled itself into quiet. We are gathered here today to bear witness to the execution of Uzumaki Naruto, former Konoha shinobi and S-rank traitor, for the crimes of high treason and attempted murder of a clan head. Thunderous applause. All humans are the same. Love the sound of their own voices, murmured the fox. As a shinobi he is allowed one honor. Death at the hands of one of his fellow shinobi. Will the appointed step forward? The cheers intensified as Sasuke stepped forward. The crowd eagerly approved of the Uchiha being the one to exorcise the demon. Any last words? Asked Tsunade as Sasuke bared his arm to the shoulder. Naruto remained silent and shrugged his shoulders, glaring Sasuke dead in his blood-red eyes. Very well, smirked Sasuke. Chidori. The fist passed clean through his chest, rupturing his heart and exploding out his back in a shower of blood. Sasuke ran him through to the shoulder, his ear pressed near Naruto's lips. Sasuke smiled widely. With the Mangekyo Sharingan, I can finally kill Itachi. Naruto spat up blood. Sasuke. I win. And with his last strength he smiled. It was the soft, gentle smile Naruto had given long ago, before all this. Above the cheers of the crowd, Hinata's scream and whimpering sobs were hidden as she buried herself into Kurenai's embrace. Danzo lowered his head and cursed to himself. Itachi's work, Naruto's, mine, undone. Tsunade, you. Sasuke's scream silenced everything. Everyone knew that he should have gained the Mangekyo Sharingan. It was the village's only hope of defeating Itachi and the Akatsuki. But they all saw Sasuke staring into the metal of Naruto's headband and saw what Naruto had done. He had, with his final hours, denied Sasuke the one thing he desired from him. The death of his best friend. Memories of a dead man are worthless, who I was before is meaningless. Ulquiorra opened his eyes. He was lying on something soft and pale, that gave off a light the color of shining silver. Above him hung a great golden phoenix, with eyes of red flame. Ulquiorra frowned slowly and sat up, finding himself in his sealed form, his Zanpakuto lying beside him. This was his afterlife. He was lying on a floor of some pure white material, soft as silk. Above him, there was a high vaulted ceiling of a deep royal purple. It appears that I am, at last receiving some sort of reward for my past life. Why, you seem a bit more optimistic now, Ulquiorra, said a voice. He turned about suddenly, and found himself gazing at a great throne of some vast black material, carven like a phoenix. A lion and a dragon arising from a pool of fire, inset with thousands of gems of a million colors and shades. Before the throne was a large mirror, 12 feet high and 8 wide, bound about with a frame of golden serpents and topped with a large silver hawk. Atop the throne sat another vast being. Ulquiorra had no doubts about who he was looking at. The Spirit King, the ruler of all creation, monarch of existence. Its eyes were fire the color of white fire, its body the color of interwoven sunlight and darkness. It was dressed in a billowing robe of purple with elaborate golden detailing. It had no hair. Instead, across the bald dome were all the symbols of faith: the crucifix, the sickle moon, the 8-spoke wheel, the Star of David, the Shinto gate, the symbol of Hinduism, the pentagram of paganism, and thousands of others he did not know. But there was one thing that surprised him. The Spirit King was old. Very, very old. He had a long beard that flowed down his chest and was tucked into a belt across his waist. His face was lined and wrinkled, but his eyes were bright and clear. Welcome to the transcendent realm, Ulquiorra Cipher, said the Spirit King. His voice was soft and thunderous, gentle and violent. I have watched your progress with great interest. Ulquiorra merely fell to one knee and bowed, so surprised that he was here, and at the revelation of the Soul King's nature, that he was unable to speak. In any case, there really wasn't anything he could say. Do you know why I summoned you here? Ulquiorra shook his head, still gazing at the floor. No, your majesty. The Spirit King smiled gently and rose from his throne, slowly walking over to him, standing over him, towering like a pillar of light. He rested his hand on his head and gently ruffled his hair, like a grandfather with a young child. Your majesty. That's a new one. Most are too surprised at seeing me. Ulquiorra, have you seen yourself? Ulquiorra looked up at him, and he saw himself reflected in his eyes. If he had emotions, he would have started. His left side was normal, his white skin and tear marks, his empty green eyes, his black hair, mask, his white uniform and his Zanpakuto. But on his other side was him. An orange and blue jumpsuit, wild blonde hair and a single cerulean eye, with peach skin and 3 odd whisker marks with a kunai holster strapped to his thigh. Uzumaki Naruto, he said, surprised. The Spirit King nodded sadly. I am afraid I must apologize to you, Ulquiorra. I'm so sorry for all the pain you suffered. I made a terrible mistake. A mistake? How could the Spirit King make a mistake? Wondered Ulquiorra. Very easily, I'm afraid, muttered the king. Ulquiorra blinked in surprise, then realized that the Spirit King was all-powerful. He could easily see into his mind. You see, Ulquiorra, there are many different dimensions, as you know, each a different reality, unique among its brethren. As he spoke, the Spirit King gently guided Ulquiorra towards the mirror. However, the dimension you were in just now, made up of the worlds of Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, Hell and the Mortal World, is special. It is the only dimension which allows access to this one. That is why the Shinigami exist, to protect the door. The Spirit King chuckled. I suppose Noitro was right. They're only glorified guard dogs now I come to think about it. He glanced at Ulquiorra, seeing if he would laugh. Ulquiorra remained straight-faced, though a small part wanted to chuckle at the Spirit King's joke. The Spirit King nodded, as if a belief or hypothesis had been proven correct. Well, he continued, gently positioning Ulquiorra before the mirror. Every other dimension has access instantly to either paradise or hell, each one different for each religion in each realm. But on rare occasions, strong beings, Here the surface of the mirror suddenly began to ripple like disturbed water, revealing the instant of the execution, can break through the barrier between the dimension and enter another. Though his mind was broiling with the Spirit King's revelations, Ulquiorra dragged his attention back to the present and watched as Naruto slumped and as Sasuke roared in anger. Then he saw Naruto's soul move away and float away, shaking uncontrollably, screaming in pain. As he watched with growing awe and mounting apprehension, he saw Naruto and the fox being split, the Kyuubi fading with an ethereal howl of agony. Then Naruto vanished. The mirror abruptly moved to Hueco Mundo. Naruto was rolling and screaming in the sand, his flesh hardening and paling. Soon, a whole flock of Ajudikas were gathered about the screaming boy, watching the form mutate. You were so wretched, so sunk in despair. You broke into Hueco Mundo. Naruto suddenly rose and before Ulquiorra's amazed eyes, he killed the Ajudikas, consuming them, eating them alive, trapped between his mortal form and a hollow existence. And from there you evolved, the Spirit King continued as the mirror faded into darkness, showing Ulquiorra standing before Kurosaki, an immovable object and an irresistible force colliding. Do you know the reason why you hated Kurosaki? The Spirit King asked gently, a small tear of gold sliding down his face. Ulquiorra and Kurosaki jeweled like madmen, a face of determination and a mask of emptiness. Because he reminded you of what you once were. Ulquiorra watched as he and Kurosaki fought on, battling above the dome. It was true, of course. The human was infuriating. How could someone fight for others and be so strong? It was incomprehensible. As they fought, the phrase, "It's not fair," had been foremost in Ulquiorra's mind. He had tormented Inoue because she and her friends were fools. Such naivety and faith in each other was foolish. In the end, everyone betrays their friends. Helping them had done Naruto no good, and it would do none for Kurosaki. Do you know why you lost? I was weak and pathetic, spat Ulquiorra as he and the hollow-eyed Kurosaki battled across the sky. The Spirit King shook his head. No, you wanted to lose. Ulquiorra looked incredulously at the Spirit King. He reminds you of who you once were. You reminded yourself of all you once hated. You realized that Kurosaki had to win. Your Lanza del Relampago was barely at full strength. You wanted him to win. You didn't want him to suffer like you did. Ulquiorra watched as his reflection acted extremely bizarrely. It didn't even attempt to hit Kurosaki. I was holding back, he realized. Something wet crawled down his right cheek. He raised his, Naruto, hand to his cheek and pulled away a tear. The Spirit King smiled sadly. You were not meant to die that day, Ulquiorra. It was a mistake on my part. I called you here to give you an offer. Ulquiorra looked back at the king as he sat on his throne, watching him intently. You were not meant to die, Ulquiorra. As Naruto, you should have lived a long and healthy life. Alas, the Kyuubi no Yoko was bound to you and as a result you suffered great pain and torments. You deserve happiness, Ulquiorra. I offer you another chance. I will return you to your home dimension, and I will give you another chance. Will you accept it? Ulquiorra did not think for an instant. No, the Spirit King nodded. You assume that Naruto is meaningless. You assume that thousands of years have passed since your death. Dimensions have different timescales, and Hueco Mundo is different. Only 3 years have passed, but there is more you should know. Naruto would have saved the world, or doomed it. The chance of the world's continued existence and prolonged happiness rested entirely on your shoulders. Who you were is not meaningless. My death made it so. I am meaningless. After my death I desired only purpose. Ulquiorra gazed into the eyes dead on, his voice cold and empty. I am an espada, a weapon, a tool. I require a purpose or I require extermination. I do not require happiness, your majesty. Ulquiorra bowed and knelt, awaiting the king's words. He had indeed changed since he was Naruto. All he had desired was to be the perfect weapon. Having suffered like Zabuza, he finally understood what the missing nin had meant about being a weapon. To feel purpose, even if it was a violent and bloody one, was to retain his sanity. His entire hollow existence, tormented by his dark memories, had turned life into a nightmare he could not escape. But with a purpose. The Spirit King coughed politely. What about the heart? What about Hinata? Soft lips pressed to his, the soft warmth of her body, the beating of her heart. I love you. Ulquiorra froze. Hinata-chan? He felt the void in his chest pull and tug, and the Naruto side began to cry again, and his own side began to shudder with some alien emotion. Meaningless, he managed to grind out, though he questioned if he was speaking the truth. Love such as she spoke of does not exist. Hinata-chan will have found another to replace me. It is of no importance. He turned as he heard a soft whispering from the mirror. Konoha. The very sight filled him with anger. But it also felt comforting in a dark obscure way. There was his old apartment block, there was the Hogake monument, there was the Ichiraku ramen stand, and there was the academy, there the cemetery. Every sight familiar and once beloved. It gave a feeling of catharsis. The mirror moved in on the Hyuga mansion, zooming in on Hinata's room. In the 3 years she had changed a great deal. Her hair was now down to the small of her back in long dark lavender tresses, and her body was clothed in a long light gray and purple jacket with cargo trousers. It appeared she had developed further, as well as her breasts were now larger and made her look even more mature and more beautiful. She was kneeling in front of a small shrine, her hands clasped in prayer. The mirror moved into an over-the-shoulder view. The shrine was simple, but well kept, as if it was the most important thing in the room. The small alcove contained a small picture of Naruto in a gilt frame, grinning broadly, as well as a blood-stained and filthy Konoha headband, and a pair of chopsticks bound with a velvet bow. Hinata's soft voice echoed out of the mirror, and Ulquiorra felt himself weaken at her words. "Hello, Naruto-kun. I'm sorry, but I've been on a mission for a while, so I haven't had a chance to talk to you. Nothing much here has changed since I was here last. Kiba and Shino help me to carry on more and more. Rock Lee helps as well, but sometimes it's just a struggle getting out of bed. Tsunade has changed so much, even more over the last few weeks. I saw Jiraiya in the wilderness. He still remembers you fondly, and cried with me when we talked about you. Naruto-kun, I'm so sorry. My father wishes me to marry soon. He's even selected a nobleman already. I've told him I don't want to marry, that the only man I'll ever love is gone, but he won't hear of it. I'm sorry Naruto-kun, but it might be that we shall meet again soon." The image faded away. Ulquiorra rounded on the Spirit King, his face uncharacteristically haunted and angry, his eyes dark. "Is this a punishment? Do you show me these things to punish me for serving Aizen-sama?" The Spirit King shook his head. "No, I only show you this to remind you of your past. Ulquiorra, do you not wish to help your old friends? Do you not desire peace? Happiness?" Ulquiorra was silent, staring at the Spirit King. "If you send me back," he said slowly, his gaze flickering back to the mirror, "many will die. I know. But, I trust you to kill only those who you need to. I doubt you wish 60 years of violent happiness followed by eternity in hell." Ulquiorra nodded. "Then, send me back." The Spirit King grinned, and suddenly seemed a lot kinder and less somber. "Excellent," he declared, clapping Ulquiorra's shoulder and nodding. "Now, Ulquiorra, before you return, what about your body? Will you return to Hinata and the elemental nations as Naruto, or as Ulquiorra?" Ulquiorra looked into the mirror, which was once again showing the elemental nations. "Naruto Uzumaki or Ulquiorra cipher. I found purpose as Ulquiorra. I am no longer a shinobi, I am an espada." The Spirit King grinned and turned him about, facing the mirror. The view faded out, revealing the land of waves, the great Naruto bridge in the forefront. He watched his body slowly return to normal, and readied himself to be returned to his former home. However, the manner of his re-entry was slightly less dignified than he might have hoped. The Spirit King kicked him in the backside, propelling him through the mirror. As he flew through the mirror, which sucked at him like water, the Spirit King called, "Good luck, Ulquiorra. Head to Sanagakure as soon as possible. Preferably in 3 days." As Ulquiorra faded into unconsciousness, he briefly marveled at the Spirit King's apparent insanity. Ulquiorra woke up to an alien sensation. He was lying on, or in, something. He couldn't think what it was. He rolled his shoulders into the material. The feeling he decided in the end, was softness. To one who had spent centuries, millennia in the cold hard sand and stones of Hueco Mundo, the feeling was strange and bizarre. Then, he felt something on his arm. Slowly, his eyes blinked open. He was lying in a field of grass near the edge of a cliff, surrounded by small white flowers, and nearby Kabikirabocho was driven deep into the earth beside the wooden grave marker of Haku. He sat up slowly and gazed at the rust-covered blade, gazing at Zabuza's weapon. The blade hadn't changed a bit, aside from the streaks of bird feces and the rust. However, the angle looked slightly off of what he had remembered. Someone had obviously attempted to take the sword in the last 3 years. He turned his head to look at his arm, and saw a small bird resting on the forearm. It looked up at him with bright eyes and then flew off in a flutter of wings. Ulquiorra watched it disappear beyond the trees, and then looked down at himself. He was dressed in his uniform, murcielago in his belt. He stood up, and rested his hands in his pockets. He felt the wind blow across his hair, raising it like a halo of darkness, and realized his mask was gone. He blinked in mild surprise. The mask was a hollow's representation of its lost heart, and he had had it for so long it was uncomfortable to lose it. However, he realized that it would solve any awkward questions about it. He reached down and opened his uniform and looked down at his chest. His hollow hole glared up at him like an ugly toad. As he gazed at it, he suddenly felt an odd sensation in his body. He reached deep within his subconscious and entered his inner world. Unlike the Shinigami, who had to attempt Jinzen, Arankars could immediately enter their inner world. He walked through the vast darkness of his soul, before he saw the burning emerald fire of his Ryotsu. But there was something odd about it. Rather than the green fire that symbolized his power, there was an odd white aura about it. He gently ran a hand through the flames, and felt an odd shiver run across his skin. He returned his hand to his pocket and left his inner world. He opened his eyes and looked around him. He turned his gaze to the town and slowly brought his body about and strode towards it. The grass was pressed down under his gentle footsteps. As he left, a strange impulse made him touch the Kabikirabocho in an affectionate manner. As he did so, he realized that of all the people he had known, Haku and Zabuza were the only people he respected, beyond Hinata. They had lived and died doing their duty, which was admirable. In that, they had influenced him greatly. He curled his hand around Kabikirabocho and tugged the blade from the earth. The metal shone in the sun and glittered dazzlingly despite its filth. He would use the blade in remembrance of the two of them. Ulquiorra was greeted as he had expected. He had done his jacket up again to avoid awkward questions about his hole, and he had held Kabikirabocho in a non-threatening manner, gripping it by the hilt, with the blade to the ground, but still several guardsmen and many townsfolk had looked at him with fear and many had reached for weapons. Ulquiorra ignored them and looked about the town. It was almost exactly as he had remembered. The buildings were all of pale stone with red and brown tiles and wooden doors. He stalked into the town square and with a long careful swing, drove Kabikirabocho into the earth. He turned and looked at the townsfolk. Out of the press of people, a familiar figure stepped forward. Tazuna hadn't changed a bit since he was here last. The old man stared at him coldly, then pointed at him. "Who are you, boy? Why do you carry the Kabikirabocho? It was left there by a super fantastic shinobi, and no one has ever had the nerve to move it." Ulquiorra turned his gaze on the man. Suddenly, the entire town felt a great cold pall. The gaze was completely inhuman, devoid of all emotion and human sentimentality, filled with a cold, cruel logic. Ulquiorra glanced at Tazuna, who was watching him with wide eyes. He suddenly felt a minuscule twinge of guilt. "I am Cypher Ulquiorra, Tazuna-sama," replied the small young man, and suddenly the pall was gone, and everyone breathed easily again. Tazuna blinked in surprise. "How do you know? I have been here once, a very long time ago." "You knew me well, I believe, once upon a time," Ulquiorra explained, remembering his first mission with a sense of nostalgia. All the villagers glanced at Tazuna, who, completely nonplussed, was reduced to working his jaw up and down in confusion. "I am a traveler, heading to Suna. However, at one point I was a student of Zabuza-sama. When I heard of his death, I decided that I would reclaim his sword and take it to the next wielder. The swords have a will of their own, and Kabikirabocho desires a new master." Ulquiorra looked at Tazuna hard for a minute, then looked past him towards the bridge. He saw a sign by it, saying, "The Great Naruto Bridge." "It appears that Uzumaki was dear to you," he said coldly. "Yes," said Tazuna, looking back at the bridge. "He helped us in a time of great trouble, saving us from a tyrant." "Did you know him?" "Only by reputation." Tazuna snorted. "Then no doubt you heard it from the Konoha nin. They lie and lie about him. They say he betrayed Konoha. They even tried to make us change the super name of the bridge. Despite the fact he saved us and this isn't even the land of fire. Ulquiorra nodded. It was not unexpected. They do not want anyone to remember my actions. I have not been to Konoha in many years. What has been happening there lately? Tazuna shrugged bitterly. I don't know much. They only come here for the goods they trade with us, or for the renaming of the bridge. All I know is that whoever is leading it is an absolute tyrant. If you're heading to Sanagakure, the case cage might know more. Ulquiorra nodded slowly. Thank you, Tazuna-sama. He turned, and prepared to leave, when he stopped. Something prompted him to say, I hope we meet again one day, Tazuna-sama. There is much to catch up on, and I would hear your tale of Uzumaki, if only to judge the boy myself. Hefting the great sword easily across his shoulders, Ulquiorra moved away, slowly gliding from the village. Tazuna watched him as he walked away. Not really knowing why, he yelled out, see you soon, Ulquiorra-san. Ulquiorra didn't stop, but he did cry out, of course. If anyone had been able to see it, they would have seen a single tear was sliding down Ulquiorra's cheek, following his marks. Ulquiorra moved through the dark forest quickly, using Sonido to swiftly move through the trees at great speed. He held Kabikirabocho tightly, and tested its weight every time he landed. However, Ulquiorra noticed something. He was slowing down. Finally he stopped and fell to his knees, wheezing heavily. Ulquiorra groaned and covered his forehead with a palm. He shook his head and blinked rapidly. What on earth is wrong with me? In Hueco Mundo I could. He sighed. He was alive. That was the problem. His spiritual pressure was dimmed, and his body was physical. This is most aggravating, he said shortly, turning his baleful gaze to the heavens. I am alive. The Spirit King neglected to mention I would be bound by the ramifications of the mortal body. So, I must eat, sleep, and relieve myself. Ulquiorra growled darkly. I hate that fucking guy. Despite himself, his lips twitched upwards slightly, before he realized that he had just insulted the ruler of existence and promptly silenced. However, it was good to know a small part of Naruto breathed inside Ulquiorra. It would make avenging himself that much more satisfying. Ulquiorra stood up and ground his teeth. He reached out and picked up the massive blade and took hold of himself. Shortly afterwards, he arrived on the border between Kase no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni. Ulquiorra stood still again and groaned despite himself. He ran a hand through his hair and covered his mouth. I see I also suffer from sickness from moving too fast. Suddenly, a small hand took his and gently pulled him to a rock and sat him down. Ulquiorra nodded his thanks absently, before his head shot up. His eyes widened in surprise. Uzumaki Naruto was standing before him, a wide cheeky grin on his face. What? Ulquiorra couldn't even ask the question. I'm a memory, Datbeo, and he gave that infuriating thumbs up. Ryo-sama awakened me to help you. To help us. We are the same soul. More or less I grant you. Naruto laughed. I'm the memory of what you once were. I'm not Naruto any more than your Kakashi Teme. Ryo-sama thought that it would be better if we hung out a little. Ulquiorra glared at him so hard that Naruto blanched and looked away, rubbing his hands nervously. Hung out? The way Ulquiorra said it made the whole thing sound like a death sentence. Why yeah, I help you out here and there by showing you how you would have once acted and give you a little advice on some jutsu and stuff. Ulquiorra looked at the memory long and hard for a moment. And what do you get? He asked eventually. Nothing. I don't exist. I'm all in your head, Datbeo, he cried, and with another thumbs up and a huge grin, he vanished like smoke in the wind. Ulquiorra sighed and returned to examining the myriad of flaws his body seemed to have suddenly developed. It helped to keep his mind from what the Spirit King had done, though he had to admit that having himself to hand might be useful in some situations. He frowned as he examined the changes to his body. He retained his Hyro and regeneration by what he felt, though they were somewhat diminished. Still, he doubted that there would be many who could harm him, beyond the cage. Then, he glared at his stomach. It growled angrily at him. I am hungry it seems. And finally, that. Ulquiorra fidgeted uncomfortably. My genitals are feeling strained, Ulquiorra thought in mild annoyance. He stood and drifted into the undergrowth and returned a few minutes later. It's strange. I haven't drunk in quite a while, he murmured as he hefted Kabikirabocho over his shoulder and took stock of his location once more. Soon, after several steps, even Ulquiorra couldn't ignore his needs. His stomach growled like an angry dog, and he found himself salivating. He slowed to a halt and looked about. The sun was low on the horizon as he stood amidst the sands of Kase no Kuni. As far as his powerful eyes could see into the west was an endless ocean of sand. To gaze at it awakened a sense of nostalgia. As the sun's dying rays struck the sand, it bleached into white. He glanced sidelong at his memory as he appeared, looking worried. "Are you okay, Ulquiorra-kun?" Ulquiorra's stomach answered for him, growling violently. Naruto giggled quietly while Ulquiorra glared at him. Ulquiorra reached out with his pesquisa, searching for life forms in the vicinity. He soon felt a village in the distance. He, to his surprise, took hold of Naruto by the shoulder and used Sonido once more. In a matter of heartbeats, they stood at the outskirts of the village. Naruto looked up at him with a shy smile. Ulquiorra suddenly felt protective of the memory. Such a feeling was strange and alien, but he supposed it couldn't hurt to have one other weakness. There were about 20 buildings of various sizes, all made out of a pale beige stone. An oasis of sparkling periwinkle blue shone in the evening sun, and there came the wafting smell of sand dumplings cooking. Naruto nudged Ulquiorra. "Hey, Ulquiorra-kun, how do you intend to eat?" "I intend to take some food and place it in my mouth and chew," he replied, completely deadpan. Naruto smiled. "Sorry, stupid question." Ulquiorra glared at him. "I am no fool. I shall improvise to gain some food. I'll have to perform some service or other for them, and in payment have a little food." Even as he walked into the village, he heard the sounds of a scuffle. He stepped away from Naruto and held Kabikirabocho in a battle-ready form. The village echoed to the sound of conflict, and there came the soft sound of metal piercing flesh. Cries filled the air as he stalked deeper into the village. Soon, the acrid stench of blood was detectable on the air. He turned a corner and came upon the main square, filled with people, and he felt his pulse rise. He hadn't felt that in many a year, not even against the hollow-eyed Kurosaki. Only one thing angered him this much. Konoha Nen, a good dozen of them stood before him, surrounding the villagers. Each wore the dark green flak jacket and dark trousers of the village. They were all chunin by what he sensed, and each seemed strong, though that seemed logical. Even Tsunade wasn't stupid enough to send some weak shinobi on a mission that definitely required a swift conclusion and rapid withdrawal. The fact that Konoha Nen were here and that they were attacking the people of Kase no Kuni demonstrated that things had deteriorated since his death. The villagers looked on in fear as the chunin grabbed them one by one and after a few questions, opened their throats from ear to ear. The leader, a thin man with dark hair and glasses, possibly an Aburame, but he couldn't see a Kakaichu, was directing them, pointing to specific people, seemingly at random. There were rare moments Ulquiorra lost his calm. He reacted instinctively to Kurosaki's suggestion he was becoming human. He acted instantly at Grimmjow's insubordination, and he had sullied himself and revealed his segunda etapa to Kurosaki. This was one of those times that he acted on his gut. He took a step forward and thrust his finger at the nearest shinobi. The balla condensed about his finger and grew till it was about a half-foot wide, before it shot like a thunderbolt from his finger. The near-silent orb of Ryotsu flew straight and true, unobserved by all until it struck its target. The shinobi didn't even have a chance to draw the breath to scream. His side was blown away, the pressurized heat cauterizing the wound almost an instant after he had blown him away. The shinobi flew a good few feet before crashing into the sand. The entire village went deathly silent in a heartbeat. The leader spun on his heel and gazed, with a certain aura of surprise, at Ulquiorra. "How did you sneak past the Kakaichu?" the man asked. Like all the Aburame, he spoke in a reserved and detached manner, but his stance and smell practically radiated concern. The other shinobi rapidly dispersed, surrounding Ulquiorra, and drew Tanto and Kanai, aiming their blades at the mysterious newcomer. They all looked calm, but their worried glances back at the corpse revealed their trepidation. "The Kakaichu sense chakra. I have none," Ulquiorra stated coldly, raising the Kabikirabocho ready to attack. He could sense the rising joy of the battle lust that he had once had as Naruto. "That would make this even better." "Stand down, Gaki. We have you outnumbered," yelled one, but she was silenced by the leader. "How did you kill Aki-san if you have no chakra? A Keki Genkei, of sorts. Forgive me, but I must now remove you from existence." And so saying, Ulquiorra used Sonido, vanishing in a burst of static. The shinobi had barely an instant to register his disappearance before one fell, sliced in twain by Kabikirabocho from hip to shoulder. Blood and bone exploded everywhere, and dyed the earth red. The shinobi leapt back, yelling in surprise and fear. Ulquiorra spun and fired another bala, blowing the head off a kunoichi. He drove the Kabikirabocho into the ground and leapt into the air. He needed speed and the Kabikirabocho was slowing him down. Kabikirabocho would have to wait a little before he could drink. The leader, landing on the roof of the central building, began to move his hands in intricate seals, summoning the Kakaichu, swarming them around Ulquiorra into a spherical prison. Ulquiorra glanced at them. They seemed to be little threat, however, the cage they formed was surprisingly dense, about a foot thick, and the buzzing drone of uncounted thousands of insects filled his ears. This shouldn't prove a problem, he thought, and fired a bala. The resulting effect was unexpected to say the least. The explosion didn't break all the way through the barrier, and the blast damaged his hand. The skin was burned from his fingers and blood ran from the ruined digits. He stared at his hand in shock. What on earth? The blast did more damage to my own hand than it did to the barrier. Ulquiorra looked back at the barrier as his hand slowly rebuilt itself. Perhaps. He reached out with his pesquisa and examined the Kakaichu. He blinked in surprise. They seemed to glow with more energy than they ought. They had gorged themselves on chakra recently. I see. The chakra is a form of barrier around them. In order to break out, I need to apply more power. Ulquiorra gathered a bala in each hand and applied even more power into each. He wrapped the ryotsu within his hands and plunged them into the Kakaichu. The insects burned into dust as he ripped the prison open. The Aburame gazed levelly at the prison. The mysterious teen was imprisoned in the cage of insects, their incessant drone filling the air. He nodded to the others. Prepare a jutsu apiece. We need to bring him in. Tsunade-sama will doubtless desire to examine him. The others nodded and all began to activate the hand seals needed for their jutsu. The Aburame turned back to the prison and frowned slightly as he saw a red glow from within the cage. The boy is preparing his Keki Genkai attack again. The chakra the Kakaichu ate earlier should. A pair of fists emerged slowly from the swarm of insects, glowing with red energy as they drew a rent in the cage. The young man dragged himself out and stood before them, floating calmly in midair. The shinobi all stared in a mix of awe and surprise at the boy. The Aburame shook his head in wonder. How? The boy said nothing. He merely pointed his fingers, and the red light left his fingers, blowing away two more. Ulquiorra glanced to the side and saw that two were about to fire their jutsu in tandem. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu. Doden. Hitsugi Nadare no Jutsu, Coffin Avalanche. The orb of fire shot straight towards him, while several boulders were torn from the desert and hurled into the air, where they flowed like water, reshaping into hollow containers. Doubtless, to trap him and burn him badly enough to take him back to Konoha. He might like that. A very swift conclusion to his vendetta. But a victory was so much more satisfying if you showed the enemy true despair first. Ulquiorra looked at them disparagingly. Child's play. He moved with Sonido behind the shinobi, and drove his fist into the Kaden user's back. The clenched fist erupted from his chest, drenched in blood. He tore it from the shinobi's chest, and with the edge of his hand, decapitated his companion. The villagers, who had watched the battle thus far in silence, began to scream as he advanced and began to methodically butcher the rest. He tore the arm from one, and blew their head away, before using the limb to beat another to death. Ulquiorra was a mad whirlwind of carnage. No sooner than one jutsu was trained on him, than he had turned on his heel and killed the offending shinobi. Soon, all that remained was the Aburame and a kunoichi. The woman was practically shaking with fear and the man was decidedly worried as they stood before him. Ulquiorra's arms were drenched in blood, the red liquid dripping from his hands. His breath was calm, but he was disturbed to find he was tiring. I must end this here and now. Ulquiorra leapt forward, the ground cracking beneath his feet as he shot forward like a thunderbolt. The kunoichi turned away in the nick of time, but the leader wasn't so lucky. He fell to his knees, his bugs swirling in panic and confusion. Ulquiorra's fist was embedded in the leader of the shinobi, who was impaled to the wall of the nearest house. Blood ran from the man, still clinging to life, in great rivulets. The sand beneath them was more akin to mud. Ulquiorra ripped his fist from the man and turned slowly so that his eyes fell on the woman. She was staring at him in fear and horror, her breath rapid and terrified. She shakily began to turn and run. Ulquiorra watched her go dispassionately. He moved over to the kabikirabocho and picked it up. He twirled it in his hand and hurled it at the fleeing woman. The blade shot through the air and cut her down, impaling her like a spear. That was cool, but cold. Ulquiorra glanced at Naruto, who looked decidedly ill. It needed to be done. I would prefer my existence to remain unnoticed. A kunai landed in his back with a soft thunk. The blade fell to the sand, its point blunted. Ulquiorra turned to the leader. You still breathe? Extraordinary. I shall commend you to your superiors before I consume them. Ulquiorra flicked another bala, blowing the man to pieces. Naruto glanced at him worriedly, but said nothing. Ulquiorra glanced at him, his eyes inquisitive. Does something trouble you? No, Ulquiorra-kun, came the soft reply. Ulquiorra turned and strode back through the village until he stood before the kunoichi with the kabikirabocho impaling her, and ripped it from her corpse in a spurt of gore. He watched as the blood was absorbed into the sword and felt the satisfaction of the blade. He looked up from the sword as the sound of footsteps drew near. The villagers were running towards them. Their leader, a pudgy man in his late 50s, stood before him and gulped, sweating heavily. Thank you, Shiro-sama, for helping us. Ulquiorra was surprised, and his eyes showed it. He had only been thanked a few times throughout his long existence. Orihime, Hinata, a few others. Never strangers. He didn't quite know how to respond. Naruto glanced between the espada and the village leader, and then elbowed him in the ribs. There is no need to thank me, sir, he replied. I came across your home and saw what was happening. I have my own vendetta with the Konoha Nen. He looked at the dead shinobi and glanced at the leader. What were they doing here? The man shuddered. They were looking for a shinobi who had run from Konoha about 2 years ago. A man called Amino Iruka. Ulquiorra felt the earth beneath him shift suddenly. Iruka-sensei? His old mentor had left the village? Why? Naruto looked surprised himself. What did they want with such a man? Ulquiorra asked, glad of his unshakable mask. The man shrugged. He was a missing nin. Nothing special though, he was little more than a drunkard, broken up about the death of his apprentice. They were only looking for him because this was the only place he left a trail. My death upset him that much? Only Hinata and her squad had shown actual regret for his execution, and he had never expected it from anyone else. He had planned to execute Iruka alongside the others. It moved him to know that Iruka cared about him so much. He nodded and looked back at the corpses. He gestured at them with the kabikirabocho. I apologize. Their commanders will soon send more. I have only assured a death sentence for the village. The man nodded and looked grim. Yes, but we can flee to Suna. We will be safe there. Ulquiorra looked at him dubiously. The man shrugged. However, we owe you a debt of gratitude. How can we repay you? Ulquiorra's belly growled and the man smirked ruefully. Food and bed? Yes, he replied. He gestured to the corpses. I shall dispose of the shinobi remains. I doubt they deserve any funeral rites. The man nodded, his countenance taking on a macabre joy in the words. Ulquiorra spent the next half an hour building a pyre, onto which he threw the corpses, burning them away, and using his bala to destroy what was left, and scattering the ashes to the sands. The food he was offered was simple, but wholesome. In any case, he was used to plain food. The fowl was cooked in a soft stew and was served with a few small dumplings and potatoes. Ulquiorra tucked into it with the ravenous delight of a hungry Ajukas. Everyone gazed at him in surprise and mild amusement at his appetite, but Naruto still looked worried. After about half an hour, during which time Ulquiorra had consumed enough to feed 8 men, Ulquiorra set down his plate and bowed his head. Arigato, he said politely. The village leader smiled and inclined his head. Doitashimashite, you must have been hungry, lad. Ulquiorra nodded. Yes, my last meal was many days ago. The village leader nodded. Do you mind if I ask where you come from then, Ulquiorra? I have never heard of a Keki Gengai which didn't use chakra. Ulquiorra folded his hands in his lap. I come from a land called Hueco Mundo. Your surprise is not unusual. This land is far beyond the borders of your maps, and beyond the ken of your sailors and navigators to find. It is far to the east and to the south. As for my Keki Genkai, we use a different energy to power our abilities in my country. Yes, all my fellow countrymen can use similar abilities, even the most humble of us. The man shook his head in wonder as the villagers murmured. You require no chakra to use your abilities? That is incredible. Many nations here would gladly sell themselves to your land. As your allies they would be powerful indeed. Ulquiorra shrugged. I doubt it. We were only a united kingdom for a short while under Aizen-sama. However, he is gone and without him, the endless night will return to how it was once before. The endless night? The sun does not touch our shores. But I have spoken too much of a land that I will never see again, nor will you. If I may ask, what has happened over the last 3 years? That was when I last was in these parts. The villagers all looked crestfallen and nursed their alcohol, while the leader shook his head and looked grim. Ah, these are dark days. Since Konoha executed their Jinchuriki they have been solidifying their power in other ways. They have trade agreements with Suna and Mizu no Kuni, which we all have to accept, if only out of fear. Fear? The Konoha Nen killed the 9 Tails Jinchuriki. They have nothing to influence anyone now. Ah, you would be right. But, their military is stronger than any other nation, and they have the Uchiha clan. Judging by your gaze Shiro-sama, the clan is an enemy of yours. Ulquiorra nodded and his Ryotsu spiked, plunging the room into cold. He glanced up and the pressure vanished. Yes, I apologize for the pressure I forced upon you, but it is an unintended side effect of the Keki Genkai. It is similar to killing intent. You were saying? The Uchiha clan head, Uchiha Sasuke I believe, has risen through the ranks like a shooting star. He is an Anbu member and part of the village council, as befits a clan chief. He has been part of many missions and has copied many techniques. Ulquiorra nodded. As ever, it appears the superiority of the Uchiha is based on their thievery. And despite losing their Jinchuriki, they have a large military, far outweighing that of Suna, Iwa or Kiri. Their Jonin are powerful and they say that Uchiha Sasuke is very powerful. Kumo is the exception but as ever, they worry that their many mighty techniques might be copied by the copycat ninja and the Uchiha. Ulquiorra nodded. He had much to think about. It seemed that he would have to reevaluate both his position and his abilities. I thank you, he said, bowing his head. But I must sleep and have much to plan. Of course, the man nodded to a young boy. My grandson will take you to a place where you can sleep. I am afraid we will be gone by morning. It would be unwise to linger here. We shall leave food and a change of clothes however. Ulquiorra stood and bowed. He had only ever bowed to Aizen-sama, but this man deserved such respect for his aid. I thank you. May I ask one last favor? Yes, of course. When you arrive in Suna, say you were saved by a stranger, but do not describe me or my powers. I would rather the Konoha Nen not know who I am and what I am capable of, for now. I understand. We will be suitably silent. Ulquiorra lay on the futon by the window in the small room, staring up at the ceiling. Naruto sat on the floor nearby with his arms crossed and pouting. Did I ever truly look that ridiculous? It is a marvel they didn't execute me sooner. Ulquiorra, can I speak to you? If you must. Do you feel guilty about killing those people? No, why not? I had to kill them to make sure none of them returned to Konoha. Silence. I killed them because I wanted to. Because they killed you, it wasn't a question. Yes. Naruto glared at him. There was more to it than that, Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra didn't reply straight away. He thought about it for a few moments then looked at his memory sidelong. I killed them for 3 reasons. 1. I couldn't let them return to Konoha with my description, as it would make it harder to collect allies. 2. They were Konoha Nen, and it gave me a large amount of satisfaction. 3. I will admit, it made me angry to see them tormenting the villagers. Naruto's glare softened and he smiled happily. Good. Pardon? You're not Uzumaki Naruto anymore. You're Ulquiorra Cipher. Ryo-sama doesn't mind you killing all these people so long as it was justified. Forgive me, but I was under the impression he was benevolent? Yeah, and you're his instrument of justice here. You plan to destroy Konoha. But you might do more than that during your lifetime. I'm simply here as a little reminder to make a few moral decisions throughout your war. I see. I take it you are invisible to everyone else then, by your earlier comments and no one spotting you during the meal? Yeah, I'm all in your head, dat bao. And he vanished. Ulquiorra was beginning to understand why the Spirit King was giving him another chance. The next day found the village empty save for Ulquiorra. He awoke fresh and energized, and quickly consumed the breakfast left for him by the villagers. As he ate, he reviewed the list of weaknesses and drawbacks he had, aside from the limitations of a mortal body. Firstly, his chakra was meager, thought that was a bit of an understatement. He had the chakra of a civilian and couldn't perform any jutsu, putting him at a disadvantage to the shinobi. His imprisonment by the Aburame solidified that hypothesis. Chakra barriers and the like might prove more difficult than he had originally anticipated. Also, he had to reconsider his strength. The fight the day before proved that he could tire in battle, though perhaps the Kakaichu might have had something to do with that. Chakra was the power of the physical body in this dimension, so it was logical that they had sucked that from him, despite his already pitiful amount. Be that as it may, he was still reasonably confident that he could put up a strong defense against most opponents, but was now reconsidering his stand. Sheer brutality would work on almost every target, but he had to be careful against the cage and quite possibly Jonin. The power they possessed was certainly going to damage him seriously, and he didn't know how quickly his regeneration could heal said damage. He conservatively believed that he could deal with most opponents, but would need to be a bit more cunning with the Jonin and so forth. After he finished, he stood up and reviewed his appearance. Aside from a little dirt and staining he could explain of on bandits and travel, he was more or less clean. He decided against carrying the Kabikira Bocho to Suna. It would be easily recognized as one of the 7 swords of the mist, and that would travel quickly back to Konoha. Such a weapon would make the wielder worthy of notice, and for the present, stealth was needed. He laid the blade down on the floor of the room and stepped outside. Reaching out with his pesquisa to the furthest reach of his abilities, he sensed a large collection of souls in the far distance. It contained several hundreds, if not thousands if he was any judge. He gathered himself and Sunidoed away. He landed outside Suna the next day. He must have traveled 100 miles or so to the village. As he walked through the desert, past the great stone head buried in the sand that marked the gate, he remembered what the Spirit King had said. Head to Sanagakure as soon as possible. Preferably in 3 days. He stopped short, his mind whirling. He had stopped one night in the village, on the same day he had arrived in this dimension. But, had it only been a single day? For all he knew, he might have blacked out on one of his stops for breath and rest. Besides, how long did it take for his soul to return here and form a mortal body? He had taken so long to get here because of the strain on his body. He had noticed he had damaged his body in all the steps on his first day, so he had slowed down in order not to tax his regeneration in Ryotsu. He rapidly counted. He estimated that it was indeed 3 days after his return, so it stood to reason that he was on time. He hurriedly walked towards the ravine that led into Suna. As he walked between the stone he came to a halt as a hot bubbling fury built in his chest and his whole burned with fire. Baki, if that was his name, and several other Suna nen were gathered before him, speaking with rapid worried tones and faces to 4 figures. A strange pale boy with painting equipment. Hitaki Kakashi. Haruno Sakura. Uchiha Sasuke. Patience, he thought his Ryotsu spiking. He would kill them later. He had to see Gaara and speak to him, though he didn't know what to say. Still, it took little willpower to contain his bloodlust. He would rather them live to see the ruin of their home and the end of Konoha. As he drew near, Baki spotted him. "Halt!" he cried, and the assembled shinobi all turned to him, the Suna nin raising their weapons. Ulquiorra turned his impassive gaze onto the new team Kakashi. The stranger was his obvious replacement, but as to how long he had been there was a mystery. He carried scrolls and paintbrushes and wore darker clothes than what was normal in Konoha. His skin was also a sickly pale, though nowhere near his pallor. Sakura's hair was shorter and she was taller and more mature, if only in body. She wore gloves and white shorts and carried several pouches filled with files and tubes and various other items of an assorted medical, scientific nature. Kakashi hadn't changed in the last few years, but his protege had. At his belt, Sasuke carried a sword, a chakuto. Across his shoulders was a dark navy cape with the Uchiha crest, and fastened with a pin in the shape of a Sharingan. His hair was longer and spikier and his expression colder and more aloof, with a slightly arrogant tilt to the head and lip. He wore an open-neck shirt in a pale beige color under a dark gray flak jacket festooned with various tools of war. His belt was covered in various scrolls and kunai and an anbu mask. Ulquiorra glanced at the mask. It was the one Sasuke had brought into the cell that day, of that he was sure, but now he saw the pattern. It was a white hawk mask with red markings round the eyes and black markings round the beak. Baki stepped forward and held out a hand. "Stop, stranger. Name yourself and your business here." Ulquiorra bent his gaze on him. Baki swallowed nervously. Something about those eyes unsettled him. "I am Ulquiorra Cipher, forgive me, Cipher Ulquiorra." Baki frowned. "In my homeland, it is the personal name followed by the family name, rather than family name followed by the personal name as it is here." Ulquiorra looked between Baki and the Suna Nen. "As for my business, I am merely a traveler. Though I did hope to meet a friend of mine from a few years ago." "Gaara of the Sand." Baki winced, and his eyes hardened. "You know Gaara?" "Yes, though it was a brief meeting," Ulquiorra replied. He was worried by what Baki's stance and the postures of the others told him. Something terrible had just happened, and it had happened to Gaara. "Gaara has been kidnapped," said Baki angrily. The world shifted in and out of focus for a few heartbeats. Ulquiorra's brow knotted and his power fluctuated. "Gaara? Who would dare? Who by?" he hissed. Baki was startled by his venomous tone. Whoever the snow-white stranger was, he treasured Gaara dearly, and that made him a good man. "A group called Akatsuki." Ulquiorra frowned. The name was familiar, like something from a half-heard or half-forgotten conversation. "Akatsuki? They aim to kidnap all the Jinchuriki and extract the tailed beasts and use them as weapons," said Kakashi. "Sorry to bother ya, Cipher-san, but I'm surprised you haven't heard of them." Ulquiorra glazed coldly at him and replied, "I live in a land far across the sea, south and east of Kiri. Tailed beasts are bedtime stories to us." He turned back to Baki. "How can I help?" "Help?" queried Baki, surprised. "Yes. Gaara is an old friend. I desire to see him safe." Ulquiorra's cold eyes bored into Baki's. "He has suffered enough." Baki pursed his lips and nodded. "Fine, enter, Cipher-san, and welcome." Ulquiorra glided past Baki, inclining his head in thanks. Baki shot a hand out and laid it on his shoulder. "I apologize, Cipher-san, but you must give me your sword until we have examined you before you can enter." The air became so tense that you could have cut it with a knife. Ulquiorra's hand curled around Murcielago's Suka protectively. The shinobi felt his unease and several hefted their weapons. However, before the situation could escalate out of control, Baki raised his hands. "Hold, Cipher-san, I appreciate that your weapon might be important to you, but please, stand down." Ulquiorra's knuckles tightened. Slowly he relaxed. "Only Gaara matters. Only you will touch it, Baki," he said, drawing the blade from the saya. The steel glittered like ice and reflected the sunlight into a myriad of directions. He passed it to Baki and stood still. The shinobi all stared at the exquisite weapon. To the shinobi dimension, swords were rarely of this quality. Besides, Zanpakuto were always superior to mortal weapons. Baki held it reverently as two of his men rapidly frisked him. Once that was done, they quickly scanned him with a small chakra scanner. They looked up from their findings and nodded at Baki. Baki passed Murcielago back to Ulquiorra, who quickly sheathed it. "Thank you, Cipher-san. Now will you all follow me?" As they moved towards Suna, the three students glanced at Kakashi in concern. He simply shrugged and followed after the Suna Nin and the stranger. "Cipher-san," he said, poking the teen in the shoulder, "forgive this small point, but I didn't know the case cage had any friends." "As I said, it was a brief meeting, but it influenced the both of us greatly," Ulquiorra replied shortly. He moved away, his fingers twitching as he submerged the idea of ripping the Sharingan from the man on the spot. Teen Kakashi glanced at one another before the stranger spoke up, a strange smile on his face. "What land do you come from, Cipher-kun? It sounds a strange place." Ulquiorra didn't respond. Kakashi glanced between the stranger and Ulquiorra before he cleared his throat. "Ya no, Cipher-san, we're only being polite. You could be a bit friendlier." "That is an alien concept for me," Ulquiorra replied darkly as he stalked onwards. The people of Suna glanced at the strangers, and the whispers of the people swiftly changed from the disappearance of Gaara to who the snow-white stranger was. Sakura frowned at him. But you are friends with Gaara? Ulquiorra turned to look back at them. Our friendship was cemented before I learned any better. He looked back ahead and clenched his fists in his pockets. Besides, I show respect only to those who deserve it. Baki turned and stared in shock at him. The group stopped as Team Kakashi all stared at Ulquiorra in anger. Sasuke stepped forth, his hand nonchalantly resting on the hilt of his sword. You should show respect to the head of the Uchiha clan, he said coolly, his eyes slowly twisting into the Sharingan. Ulquiorra turned again so that he was gazing straight into those wheels. He tilted his head and narrowed his eyes. Clan, you are a king of corpses and rotten flesh. You and Uchiha Itachi are the last Uchiha. There is no clan. And he turned his back on Sasuke, daring him to strike. Sasuke's lips twitched in a snarl and his sword flashed as he drew it, laying the blade along Ulquiorra's collar. The last ones? Itachi is no Uchiha. Ulquiorra said nothing. The last one to insult my clan was executed as a traitor, as was just. Ulquiorra's knuckles tightened. This is not Konoha. Nor do you frighten me. He reached up and he flicked the blade away. If you intend to threaten me, make sure you come at me with everything you have, Uchiha Sasuke. You might not walk away with unscathed. Sasuke was so shocked, he couldn't pull himself back together before Ulquiorra had resumed walking, followed by a very nervous and agitated Baki. Sakura turned to Kakashi. Who does he think he is, insulting Sasuke-kun like that? Kakashi shrugged. NNNH. Still, he said rubbing the back of his head, he probably lost kin to an Uchiha, or has beef with Konoha. But there's something off about that kid, he still thought as they walked on after the others. Something tells me to keep an eye on him. He didn't think it strange that Ulquiorra knew Sasuke's name. After all, they were quite well known, even to alien lands. The great sphere of the Case Cage's office soon came into sight and they swiftly entered the building. They climbed several sets of stairs and reached the Case Cage's and Council's office. Ulquiorra tilted his head in surprise as he saw Kankuro and Temari standing by a large desk covered in various maps and documents. They were talking hurriedly with each other and several other officials and military-appearing shinobi. Ulquiorra looked around for the fifth Case Cage, but couldn't see anyone with the air of such a shinobi. He looked to the right and saw the statues of the four previous Case Cage. He knew the Yondaime was Gaara's father. Then it hit him. He turned to Baki. Is Gaara the Case Cage? Baki nodded. Good. I'm glad he reached the highest pinnacle. Ulquiorra remembered their fight and their conversation very well. Baki cleared his throat. Temari-sama, Kankuro-sama, the reinforcements have arrived. Team Kakashi and an old friend. The group round the table fell silent as they examined the newcomers. A few looked disturbed and frankly more worried at the sight of the Konoha nin, but all were bemused by Ulquiorra. This is Cypher Ulquiorra. He's an old friend of Gaara, Baki explained. Kankuro's eyes narrowed and Temari drew her fan. An old friend of Gaara? He had no friends. You would be correct, Kankuro-san, said Ulquiorra, bowing his head. But be that as it may, we were friends, though it was a short introduction. It was during the months before and after the Chunin exams, he murmured. I am here to offer my help in finding him. The two Sand siblings glanced at each other, then relaxed and gestured them over. Kankuro pointed to the map. The two Akatsuki members attacked Suna and one of them, a blonde missing nin from Iwa, abducted Gaara. Kakashi nodded. Last I heard, the Akatsuki only have one member from Iwa, a guy called Deidara. Put in a Suna commander. He has the Bakuten and a strange kinjutsu which allows him to use explosive clay. A cunning foe then, said Ulquiorra. Everyone glanced at him. Any piece of clay or stone around him may prove to be a trap. It would be wise to err on the side of caution when planning to deal with him. The shinobi all looked surprised at that, but they nodded. Very quick of you to figure that entire thing out, Cypher-san, said Kakashi mildly, smiling. It was logic, nothing more. Ulquiorra drew out one of his hands and pointed at the map. Do we have any idea where he fled to? Kankuro nodded. I managed to get a bit of cloth from the other member of the pair, Sasori, of this village, and we can follow the chakra residue to their hideout. Kakashi nodded. My team will go on ahead and see if we can hold up the ritual long enough for you to arrive. I'd like to see them fight us all off. An old woman with gray hair and a shriveled face looked over at Ulquiorra. What will you do, Ulquiorra? Lady Chio, started Baki. I will go on ahead of Team Kakashi and execute the Akatsuki if I am able, or hold up the ritual if I cannot. The silence was so complete it made a scream out of a whisper. Are you insane? Whispered Sakura. No, though there are times I wonder, Ulquiorra muttered the last part as he glared at Naruto, who was sitting on the desk and giving him what he could best describe as a cat face. 3. Before leaving. Chio shook her head sadly. You are too young to search for death, child. No, I'm too old to live. He turned and walked away, taking a fragment of the cloth from a flabbergasted Kankuro. He walked towards the doors and turned in mild surprise as he felt a small hand on his shoulder. Lady Chio had her hand on his shoulder and was looking at him with a macabre twinkle in her eyes. You are a strange boy, Ulquiorra. Come on. Lend an old woman a hand. Ulquiorra was rarely truly stunned, and this was one of those times. He picked up Chio like he was giving her a piggyback ride and turned to the shocked faces of the assembled shinobi. How do you intend to get there before us? Asked Kakashi. My Kekkei Genkei, he replied shortly. You had better follow swiftly. I can move very fast. There was a burst of static and they vanished. Everyone gasped and ran outside. In the far distance, and accelerating fast, was Ulquiorra. Kakashi and Sasuke cursed silently that it was a Kekkei Genkei technique and so couldn't be copied. But Kakashi blanched. The boy had serious power. Put me down, now. Yes, Chio-sama, Ulquiorra replied, setting down the old woman on a nearby rock. They were a good dozen or so miles from Suna, and the old matron was highly agitated by Ulquiorra's insane speed. She ran a hand over her mouth and looked slightly motion sick. How can you? A unique Kekkei Genkei, found only in my homeland, Hueco Mundo. He stood opposite her and looked down at the scrap of cloth in his hand. He examined it and reached out with his Pesquisa and found the trickle of chakra leading to Kawa no Kuni. He cursed to himself. He had only just passed through there. I am sorry Chio-sama, but time is of the essence. The Akatsuki have Gaara in Kawa no Kuni. We must hurry before they extract Shukaku. Chio slowly nodded. My Ulquiorra, but you can make me feel young again, moving like that, she said, smirking thinly. As they moved off, Ulquiorra glanced back at her. Chio-sama. Why are you allied with Konoha? She grimaced and her grip on his shoulders tightened. We needed allies after the death of Gaara's father. Konoha offered us reasonable trade deals and agreed to take fewer missions from the K's daimyo so that we could increase income. However, after the death of the Uzumaki boy, it was revealed he was a Jinchuriki. You would think that would slow down Konoha, but no. They have been expanding their military and infrastructure at an alarming rate. Even with the Ichibi, we are no match for their military. About, maybe a month, after the death of Uzumaki, the Konoha Nin began to expand their territory into K's no Kuni and other areas around them to the south. At first it was dark rumors. Villages found empty bar bloodstains and dead animals, clan jutsu missing, kinjutsu vaults looted. Then, rumor became truth. Villages holding anyone the Hokage perceives to be a threat is attacked, their people butchered and enslaved and their jutsu and knowledge looted. She shook her head. The third and fourth Hokage would never have stooped to such levels of depravity. They say that Hitaki Kakashi Teme and Uchiha Sasuke have been assigned to many darker missions of A and S rank. They say that they torture their targets on these missions to show them their techniques so that they can copy them. She looked at him curiously. His lips were set in a hard line and his pupils were constricted to dagger-thin slits. Then came the clincher, she said darkly. After 2 towns in the desert were destroyed, Gaara, who had by then become Cage, demanded to know what had been happening. The Konoha Nin then revealed what they had been doing. Gaara was about to rescind the treaties when they revealed who had been investing most heavily in our economy. Konoha. Yes. You see, Ulquiorra, if we gave up on the trade rights with Konoha, they would remove all the money and funding they had secretly been feeding into Suna. Without it Suna would collapse. So, we have to turn blind eye to the ever-encroaching advance of Konoha. Even the K's daimyo has to turn the other way. Why? He is new to the job, though most able. Our previous daimyo was removed from power after his part in the fracas of the invasion of Konoha and replaced by his brother. He cannot do much against the Konoha Nin. The hidden village's independence from the majority of the world has now revealed the poisoned spike in the grip. We cannot call for aid from the daimyo without starting a true war. Not just a shinobi world war, but a true world war. So he has to ignore the bloodshed in his kingdom, out of fear of the High Daimyo. It has been made very clear that if we attack Hai no Kuni, then the High Daimyo will support the Konoha Nin with his army. Ulquiorra nodded. This was grim tidings. If they were blithely massacring villages and towns left, right and center, it proved that Konoha's power was growing. The fact that the other 8 Jinchuriki hadn't been unleashed against them presented an even more worrying theory. They had some weapon or device that prevented the other villages from unleashing their Biju. If that was true, he would definitely need allies. Why don't the villages ally and crush Konoha? After all, put it all together and you have 8 Jinchuriki. Not even Hitaki Kakashi and the other Jonin could stop that. Shio nodded glumly but said nothing. He glanced back at her. I take it Konoha has been investing in several other villages? Yes. Only Kumo is removed from that problem. But they are loath to risk their beloved Jinchuriki. Beloved? That surprised him. Yes. The Hachibi Jinchuriki is the brother of the Reikage, and the Nibi is sealed into one of their most talented kunoichi. Both are loved among their people, and they hardly ever leave the village, so fearful is the Reikage of seeing them hurt. It appears Kumo might be spared in my purge if it truly cares for its Jinchuriki. He was glad that 2 of his fellows at least had some form of peace and happiness. Shio shook her head. Forgive me, Ulquiorra, but our main concern is saving Gaara. We shall discuss politics later. Yes, Shio-sama. And so saying, Ulquiorra put on more pace and shot through the desert like a thunderbolt. After nightfall, they had crossed the nearest border into Kawa no Kuni. Here, despite protestations, Shio had insisted that he rest. When he had initially refused, she had revealed several puppets and forcibly made him lie in the soft grass. As the moon rose, he looked at the old woman sitting nearby, tending a small fire. Sasori is a kinsman, isn't he? She looked up in surprise. Judging by your reaction, I am correct. Is that why you chose to accompany me rather than Hitaki and his team? She didn't reply immediately, instead gazing into the fires and stoking them. Hitaki's father killed Sasori's parents. He is my grandchild. I didn't want to arrive with the son of the man who had broken my little boy's heart. Silence fell over the camp. As the stars twinkled in the sky, Chio asked, you lost someone close to you to Team 7, didn't you? Yes. A distant relative. We were close. Almost inseparable. Chio nodded. Well, if things continue the way they do, perhaps we might have revenge in the near future. Ulquiorra nodded, his lips twitching, and Chio grinned savagely. Hinata swerved around Neji's fist and drove her own into his chest, blocking the tenketsu beneath his right lung. He stumbled back and she resumed the attack, launching several strikes to his face and abdomen. He fell back and Hinata drew back her fist for the finishing blow, when Neji flipped backwards, placing his hands on the floor and powering his feet into her jaw. She fell back, dazed and bleeding. Neji righted himself and drove his hand at her heart. The fingertips connected and Hinata felt a flood of Neji's chakra enter the tenketsu. She was blasted off her feet and across the dojo, and crashed into a wall. The clan elders winced at the power of the blow and nodded to signify that the match was over. Hinata staggered to her feet and clasped her sides, wheezing heavily. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth and her chest hurt like hell. She pushed past the gathering Hyuga and outside. She stood in the gardens, bathed in the moonlight, breathing heavily. She had been training so hard for the last few days to pull off that attack so that she could defeat Neji in this training match. But as ever, she had failed. She breathed in and scrunched up her eyes, refusing to cry. She managed to avoid the other Hyuga long enough to reach her room, where she fell on her bed and coughed violently. After a few minutes of convulsions, she managed to regain enough control to strip off her clothes and change to her sleepwear. She was about to climb into bed, when there came a knock at the door. Enter, Hinata said, before suddenly remembering her shrine was visible. She hurriedly ran over and closed the doors of the shrine and locked them, just as the door opened and her father stepped in. Hinata, he said shortly, his gaze dark and heavy. Atu-san, she said, bowing. He looked at her appraising Ly. Why do you insist on wearing those ridiculous yukata? She looked down at the kimono she wore. It was a simple affair and quite childish really. It was a pale orange with flowers on with a bright pink obi. Sorry, Atu-san, she said, bowing again, but I like. That is neither here nor there, he replied coldly. You will soon be married to Uchiha-san. You must start acting like a Hyuga and a wife, not a child. And so saying he strode out, sending in 2 branch house women. Despite her protests and struggles, they tore the kimono from her and dressed her in a new one. It was a deep, blood red, with the Uchiha crest over her heart, and decorated with hawks and coiling serpents of white and blue. They left, taking the old kimono with them, for the fire, they said. Hinata stood a while, staring at herself in the mirror. The kimono was a masterpiece, a true work of art, and must have cost a great deal to make. She tore the crest from the material, her face twisted with anger and despair. That pig will never have me. During one of the patrols, several shinobi had come across a book which contained a great deal of information on the 3 great dojutsu. It was discovered that the Rinnegan was the ancestor of both the Byakugan and the Sharingan. The village council was ecstatic at the news. If they could breed Sasuke with a Hyuga, then after some careful manipulation, they might get the Rinnegan, watered down and less powerful than a natural it may be. So, Hiyashi had offered her, the next clan head. When she had discovered who she was to marry, she had despaired. She had hoped to remain pure and untouched for Naruto in the beyond. But now, the tanto glittered in the moonlight. She laid it against her flesh, and tried to make the cut. But she couldn't. She was too scared. She cried as she let the tanto fall to the floor. I'm worthless. Ulquiorra and Chio moved off early the next morning, shooting through the forests and valleys like streaks of lightning. Ulquiorra's footfall was silent as a ghost's, and his eyes were focused on the distance. They were nearly there. Hold on, Gaara, he thought. I'm coming. Finally they saw it. Ulquiorra stopped and set down Chio, gazing at the cliff across the river. Across the river stood the sheer face of stone, bearing a single piece of paper, with the letter, Forbidden, in large bold red. Gaara is behind here, said Ulquiorra, drawing Murcielago. He only used the blade on worthy foes, and if Akatsuki was behind there, then they were worthy. Chio pursed her lips. I know this seal. We must remove 4 other tags like this one, scattered throughout the area, before we can remove this one, and access the... Ulquiorra didn't listen. He raised his left arm and gathered the ryotsu needed. Then, erring on the side of caution, he added a little more. The small green focal point glowed brighter and brighter, growing to the size of a football. Gaara, Ulquiorra fired the Sero. The great emerald beam speed through the air faster than an arrow, casting a sickly corpse light over the area. It struck the rock and met a force and resistance. The immovable object braced itself against the unstoppable force of the juggernaut. They strove for a heartbeat, and then the juggernaut won, shattering the rock like chalk beneath a hammer. The stone disintegrated into a myriad of pieces and the cave mouth was revealed. Ulquiorra lowered his hand as the ryotsu dissipated. Chio's jaw was wide enough that you could have fed her a whole apple without choking her. How? My keke genkai, he replied shortly. It appears ryotsu can trump chakra, he thought with satisfaction as they entered the cool darkness. The cave was large and deep, stretching back a long way into a deeper darkness. At the back of the cave was a wide opening into a tunnel or passageway, running deep into the earth. Scorch marks covered the floor for a long way, following the path of his Sero. He placed his left hand back in his pocket. He was confident. Cool darkness was his element, and he didn't think too much of whoever built this place. He would have placed a few more traps and laid a stronger defense. But that was neither here nor there. Ulquiorra, murmured Chio, raising her hands and slipping into a defensive position. Ulquiorra looked ahead and saw the hunched insect-like form of whom he guessed to be Sasori approach up the tunnel. Ulquiorra, said the man, a strange name. The leader looked up from the unconscious Jinchuriki as the sound of disintegrating rock and the fall of stone. Sasori-san, Deidara-san, he said, his eyes gazing up the passageway. What was that? Sasori turned and looked back up the tunnel. Someone must have broken through the barrier jutsu. Shall I deal with them? Yes, and quickly. The ritual has only just begun. We haven't even started the battle yet. Sasori bowed his head and murmured, as you will, Leader Sama. He slowly turned and scuttled up the passageway like a cockroach. He saw the intruders long before they saw him. One was his grandmother. He wasn't surprised. Of all the people who would come after him, it was most likely going to be his grandmother. However, her companion was strange. His skin was pure white, as was his long coat and hakama with black boots. His hair was blacker than night and his eyes were cat-like, and a bright green, like emeralds. He carried a katana in his right hand, while his left was in his pocket. To complete the picture he had 2 teal tear tracks down his face, like he was eternally weeping in misery. His grandmother looked ahead and saw him. "Ulquiorra," she murmured, raising her hands. The stranger looked ahead and saw him. "Ulquiorra? A strange name," Sasori said, scuttling forward. "As befits a stranger in a strange land," Ulquiorra replied. He leveled the blade at Sasori. "Where is Gaara?" he hissed. His Ryotsu was spiking wildly now, the air around him quivering. Sasori seemed to feel it. "Your killer intent, if that's what it is tremendous, boy," he stated. Ulquiorra was about to reply when he saw a flash of movement. He turned and raised his sword just in time to block another blade. His eyes widened. The enemy was wielding a copy of Murcielago. He leapt back, widening his stance, and his attacker stepped forward. Ulquiorra stared stunned at an exact replica of himself, down to the emotionless expression. "You seem surprised," said Sasori mildly. "You see, if you had removed all the tags, you would have made a clone of yourself for each one. And those clones will tear you to pieces," and so saying, the other 3 clones stepped out. Each held Murcielago in their right hand and wore the same expressionless mask. Even Ulquiorra knew that there was only reaction at a time like this. "Shit, Chio-sama, I must request that you stand back. This will be violent." Ulquiorra stared his clones dead in the eye. There was a heartbeat of silence, then replicas and original used sonido to close the gap. Ulquiorra blocked all 4 blows with his sword, before firing a volley of bala, which the replicas dodged. Streaking forward, he cut down on one, scoring a long gash across his chest. The replica sonidoed behind him and Ulquiorra caught the blow with his left hand. He was startled to see his hand was cut. "They must have all the powers and abilities I have now." He swung his sword again, cutting the replica's cheek before turning in time to block another strike to the back of his head, twisting Murcielago around the copycat blade, and driving it up, cutting the clone's face. Blood ran down the clone's face and he repeatedly slashed at Ulquiorra, who knocked aside nearly every blow and dodged the others nonchalantly. It appeared that the clones knew all of his sword styles, and judging by the occasional punch and kick, they also had his unarmed combat ability. "This is problematic. I wonder if they have all my abilities." He slashed at the clone again, cutting of his left hand. As the clone fell back, the ones he had injured earlier reappeared and attacked him again, this time fully healed. Ulquiorra cursed silently, though his face remained impassive. He blocked the overhead blow of the 2 before him and caught the blade of a third in his free hand. The 4th clone, however, proved more difficult. The clone raised its finger and fired a bala straight at his face. Ulquiorra twisted and hurled one of the clones in its path. If logic served, they would all have the same Ryotsu as him. Thus the bala would probably blast through the Hierro. Of course that was only a theory. The clone stumbled into the red ball and his side was blown away. The clone shuddered and then disintegrated into ash. 1 down, 3 to go. Sasori watched Ulquiorra duel his clones in awe. All of them moved so fast that they were mere blurs, with the occasional half-second pause which froze them in action, like a painting. Then, the mad whirlwind would start again, steel swinging in deadly arcs as all of them dodged, blocked, wove and struck with the fluidity and grace of dancers. Sasori's lips twitched eagerly. The boy would make a fine addition to his Hitokugutsu collection. As he watched, a clone fell and the original and replicas disengaged, firing small red orbs of energy at each other in an unending crimson volley. The cave was filled with blood-red light as they jeweled, throwing vast, dark and twisted shadows across the cave as the blasts threw up dust and stone. Shio shook her head in awe as the 4 Ulquiorras jeweled. She could see the original, his face hard as stone as he waded through the orbs of energy, firing his own with pinpoint accuracy. The pressure of the 2 colliding masses of energy was literally shaking the earth beneath them. Ulquiorra suddenly vanished with his beyond inhuman movement, appearing before one of the clones and taking of its arm in a vicious swipe, spilling dark blood across the air, hugging the blade tight. The injured clone fell back and Ulquiorra was at work again, hacking and slashing with a controlled wrath and power which reminded her of an assassin. His feet, and those of his clones barely touched the ground as they fought, leaping into rapid assaults and fluid defenses during which only the tips of their toes touched the stone. Blood ran from all their blades, but as she watched, their wounds were all healing. Not even the Jinchuriki had regeneration on that scale. The boy was incredible. Ulquiorra slashed at another clone, cutting its face again and again. He drove his fist into its jaw, sending a few teeth and blood everywhere. The smoke grew and grew as they fought. Ulquiorra was angered that he couldn't destroy his clones. Despite being the original, and therefore superior, he was unable to kill his targets. Logic of course dictated that because they were all the same strength, he would be worn down eventually by the clones. Unless, of course, he outwitted them. He leapt away and raised his finger. As he did so, the others followed suit, each charging a Sero. Ulquiorra did the same. The three-way Sero grew and grew until they fired. Not even he would survive a blast of this magnitude. It would vaporize him instantly, turning him to a vapor as thin as smoke before he faded away. Ulquiorra's lips twitched. Gran Rey Sero. He swept Murcielago across his finger. The blood mixed with his Sero, and the green orb suddenly turned opaque and then flashed a blinding white, the color of the moon. With a twitch of his hand, it fired, the blast zigzagging through the air, spinning like a shuriken and striking the three Sero like a bolt of lightning. There was a blinding flash, followed by an instant of darkness so absolute that the night was made like daylight by comparison. Then, the earth shattered. The roof of the lair was blown away, revealing the sky. Shio and Sasori were flung away by the blast like leaves in the wind, landing hard on the shattered stone as the hill collapsed into rubble. The air shimmered as if a thunderstorm had struck. The smoke was so thick that nothing could be seen for a long while. The forest was as silent as a tomb. Shio sat up coughing, blood pouring from a gash on her head and her leg broken. Sasori righted himself like an overturned beetle and stared in absolute awe at the ruination. Impossible. How could one boy hold such power? The smoke began to clear. Shio felt a tear fall down her face as she realized Ulquiorra was dead. The poor boy. Gaara will be. Harsh, ragged breathing came from within the smoke and dust. A figure stood there. His left arm was gone and his legs as well, but he stood, hanging in midair. The smoke faded, revealing Ulquiorra. The right of his face was burned to bloody tatters, his eye blinded. His right arm was mutilated and bleeding, gripping his blade tightly. His clothes were bloodied tatters, revealing a horrifically tortured torso, covered in lacerations and bloody tears. Bones and a few organs were visible through the rents. His hair was singed and burnt and a hole was in his chest beside which was a twisted tattoo of the number 4, in a Baroque lettering. Ulquiorra slowly began to regenerate, his torn body stitching itself together again, bloody rents healing and bones reforming. A pair of skeletal legs appeared and built themselves up through veins, muscle and skin. His arm grew from a skeletal caricature to its previous health. His face rebuilt itself, his eye returning to its cold green. Soon, Ulquiorra stood there, naked but for Hakama scorched short, but unscathed. He clenched and unclenched his left hand, standing in a pool of his own blood. "This is my power, Sasori," he said, swinging the blade and leveling it at the man, "and I haven't even begun to get started." The ashes of the destroyed clones faded into nothingness. His gambit had paid off. "Shio-sama, please stop staring at my hollow hole and prepare your weapons. This battle is far from over," Ulquiorra continued. Shio blanched and nodded, desperately trying and failing to put aside her confusion. Sasori shook himself and shrugged his shoulders. "Well, I certainly look forward to making you a puppet. Your Kekkei Genkei is incredible. I see," he said, standing up straight, "that I'll have to get serious." And so saying, his cloak and body fell away, revealing a teenage boy with red hair and a droll expression. "A puppet? I see. Very well then, Sasori, let it be done." Ulquiorra swept his blade down to his side and awaited the first strike. Shio hastily began the complicated hand gestures and summoned two old and worn-out puppets from a scroll. Sasori frowned at them. "The mother and the father? I know their workings inside out." His voice reminded Ulquiorra somewhat of Kurosaki Ichigo. Shio smirked thinly. "Let us see." Blades burst from the hands. Ulquiorra looked at the blades appraising Ly. "You have some bite still, Shio-sama." Sasori flipped out a scroll. "Well, you have shown yours." Now, I'll show mine. A strange puppet seemingly covered in thick leather and a dark robe appeared, with chaotic dark hair. Chiyo gasped. You turned the case cage into a Hitokugitsu. Ulquiorra looked at the puppet. Ingenious. Am I to take it that the Hitokugitsu retain their abilities post-mortem? Sasori smiled. It was an evil, twisted smile, like the one Neutra wore whenever they met. Meet the Sandane Case Cage, master of the Iron Sand. Ulquiorra sighed and closed his eyes. He didn't need to ask what he meant by that. Sasori flicked his fingers, sending the puppet forward on its strings as fast as an arrow. Ulquiorra leapt towards it, and struck at its head. From its mouth issued a fine black powder cloud. The sword met the cloud with the ring of metal against metal. The Iron Sand. He twisted the blade, dragging it loose, hacking at the puppet's left side. The arm jerked up, revealing a thin blade that blocked Ulquiorra's. The metal shrieked and cracked beneath Ulquiorra's strike, but before Ulquiorra could press the advantage, more iron sand shot from the puppet's mouth, coalescing into a hammer and smashing him away. He pursed his lips and righted himself in freefall, landing on his feet on a boulder. He tilted his head and avoided the iron sand arrows shot at his head. Chiyo sent her puppets shooting forward, swerving round the iron sand, and aiming for her grandson. He glanced away from Ulquiorra and saw the incoming attack. He flipped the case cage away and lifted its arms, blocking the puppets and forcing the three of them into a bizarre duel as their arms extended blades, and they clashed. Ulquiorra saw the opening and shot towards Sasori with Sonido. Sasori, however, saw him vanish and the distinctive sound of static. He hurled up a finger, and the case cage's left arm fell away, revealing several compartments filled with summoning tags. Ulquiorra frowned at them, then swung his sword up and leapt into the air as about 100 puppet arms shot from the seals, each one incredibly flexible. He swerved as the arms swung this way and that, following him with the persistence of bloodhounds. How irksome. He placed his feet on a boulder and shot forward, holding his sword at its furthest reach to the left of his body, and as the hands reached for him, clawing at him, Ulquiorra moved his arm and simultaneously sonidoed above the arms. With a single blow he cut them down, like beheading a snake. The truncated mass fell to the ground and Sasori smiled thinly. Excellent. From the case cage's left side a buzzsaw emerged, swinging out and around, forcing Chiyo to pull mother and father away. Ulquiorra landed before the case cage, holding his sword in both hands above his head. Away with you, he said, bringing the blade down. The case cage brought its hands up defensively, blocking Murcielago with buzzsaw and bladed arm. Ulquiorra kicked upwards with his left foot, knocking the head back. He hefted Murcielago again and swung it down again. It connected and cut the puppet open. From the wound, more sand poured out. Sasori smirked. Ulquiorra, run, cried Chiyo. Ulquiorra quickly leapt away and landed on the floor as the sand twisted and shifted. It spun round and around like a Ferris wheel, forming a large ever-growing oval around the case cage, whose Sasori lifted into the air. From the oval long spindly legs of iron sand, like some monstrous spider, began to grow, fast as flying hawk. Ulquiorra realized the true danger of this technique, just as Sasori declared its name. Satetsu Kaiho. Ulquiorra bobbed and swerved like a crane as the spindly blades jabbed and thrust at him, and more grew from the case cage. It doesn't matter how long you try to fight for, kid, taunted Sasori. The blades will get you in the end. Ulquiorra did not deign him with a response. Instead he began to fly towards Sasori, dodging through the many arms of metal. Chiyo was hard-pressed as well. Her broken leg was quivering and her movements with the puppets were more and more erratic as she attempted to escape the web of iron. Ulquiorra snorted and flew faster, swerving through the blades like a herring before Sasori swung his hands out. Two clouds of iron sand gathered and smothered Ulquiorra, containing him in a large square box of dust. Ulquiorra nodded and awaited the next move. He didn't have to wait long. A hole appeared in the cage, large enough for a person to fly through swinging a blade. And so the case cage did, shooting through the hole, its blades outstretched. Ulquiorra stood before it, his arms held narrow and close to his body. As the blades drew an inch to his skin, he moved, twisting away and aiming upwards, driving his left fist into the head. The hierro combined with his immense strength drove the fist clean through the head. decapitating the puppet and ripping the spine from the doll. The puppet burst apart, spilling the last dregs of iron sand as the prison collapsed around Ulquiorra. He fell beneath the weight and stood in the ruins of the lair, which slowly filled up with the sand like a small lake with islands of stone. Sasori gazed at him with a dispassionate anger. "You have destroyed my second greatest work," he said coolly. He lifted the edge of his robe and threw it away. Ulquiorra's eyes widened in surprise. The boy's youth was false, he was a puppet. "It's been a while since I used myself," the man laughed. Ulquiorra tilted his sword into a defensive position as the puppet master slowly rose into the air on his long scorpion tail. The two of them gazed at each other for a long moment before they both leapt at each other. From Sasori's hips burst out 2 sets of 5 blades, each set on a circular engine on spindly arms, while a large rectangular box was built into his back, containing 4 scrolls. The blades began to spin and Sasori hacked and slashed at Ulquiorra. He blocked the blows carelessly, before swinging his own blade at Sasori's head. The man dodged and resumed his assault. He and Ulquiorra dueled back and forth. Ulquiorra thrust and slashed with his blade with an untamed and cold ferocity, while Sasori bobbed and weaved, swinging his blades with a casual skill that belied his careless smirk. The blades of the two men hacked with wild abandon. Several times Murcielago was caught in the whirling blades, and Ulquiorra was forced to retreat in order to break free. Sasori began to punch and kick at Ulquiorra, who simply slapped him away. His incredible strength sent Sasori flying away. Ulquiorra pursued him, his sword raised high to deliver the final blow. Sasori flipped in midair, landing on his hands and sending the spiked tail straight at Ulquiorra's face. Ulquiorra batted the spike aside, but it still nicked his hand. Ulquiorra hacked and slashed at Sasori, who was forced onto the defensive by the sheer violence and ferocity of the assault. Sasori swung his blades out, holding his arms close to his chest protectively. Ulquiorra blocked the incoming blows with ease, and thrust his blade forward, driving it into Sasori's head, piercing his eye and exploding out the back of his head. Ulquiorra flicked a ball at the puppet, and blew him apart. The pieces fell into the sand and clattered on the rock. Ulquiorra turned to Chiyo, who was looking solemn. "I apologize for killing him, Chiyo-sama, but..." Ulquiorra flicked aside the blade shot at his head without turning around. He looked around to see Sasori reconstructing himself, placing the various pieces back together again around a strange container in his chest. His head last, the damaged eye repairing itself as he glared at Ulquiorra. "Incredible," Ulquiorra acknowledged. "The ability to reconstruct oneself no matter how badly damaged you are. Most incredible. You are harder to kill than Kurosaki Ichigo." Sasori frowned and cracked his knuckles, examining his hands minutely. Ulquiorra pointed Murcielago at him and murmured, "It seems I shall have to leave nothing intact." Sasori smiled thinly and reached behind him, pulling out a red and yellow scroll from his back. He tossed it in his hand casually. "I see that I've been going too easy on you." Chiyo reached into her knapsack and pulled out a scroll of her own, a deep purple one. "This is a technique I forbade myself from using," she said glumly. "I thought I would never need it again," she continued, as she undid the string, "but I suppose life isn't that simple." She opened it and Ulquiorra saw the 10 seals marked on it. Sasori tilted his head as the seals began to glow. "Now," she finished, "let's get this show on the road." She dropped into the traditional chakra summoning or seal releasing stance and the glow reached a new brilliance. The seals lowly detached themselves on purple-blue clouds, glowing ethereally. Soon, 10 puppets, each dressed in white robes with the mark on their foreheads, each a unique work of art. "The number of puppets a puppeteer can use is reflective of their power," muttered Sasori. "You really are powerful, Grandma." Ulquiorra gazed at the puppets critically. "To be able to use so many puppets at once. You really are something else, Chiyo-sama." "Grandma Chiyo's quintessential 10 fingers," Sasori continued, his smile taking on an insane quality. "There are rumors that you used those to conquer a castle. Shirahiji. Jiki Chikamatsu no Shu. The puppets created by Chikamatsu Monzaemon himself." Ulquiorra raised his blade. "Enough ancient history. Prepare yourself." Sasori smiled and opened the right side of his chest. The glow of chakra emanated from it, burning like fire. From the fire more than 100 chakra threads flew up into the scroll as Sasori opened it. Ulquiorra watched in awe and trepidation as more than 100 puppets shot out from their imprisonment in the scroll, each bearing a savage weapon in their grasp. The army floated high above them, casting a shadow over the ruins. Ulquiorra stared up at the puppet horde and glanced back at Chiyo. "Back me up." Sasori's smile widened. Ulquiorra flew forward, brandishing his sword as the puppets moved to surround him. He swung Murcielago in a series of wide arcs, severing limbs and cutting bodies in twain. Pieces of machinery and rags fell to the floor far below. Chiyo sent her own puppets into the battle, their own weapons swinging. One of them moved beside Ulquiorra, swinging two large broad swords about her, and laying about itself with a wild skill. Ulquiorra and the broad sword-wielding puppet cut a broad swath through the ranks, supported by the long-haired puppet swinging the puppet with the spinning chakra blade head. Ulquiorra soon noticed that the more of the puppets he cut down, the more powerful the rest became. So, he can concentrate on all the puppets at once, but the less puppets there are, the more focused he becomes. Ulquiorra stepped back from a slash and swept his free hand up, cracking the puppet's skull open like a ripe apple. Even as Ulquiorra and the 10 puppets struck about them, felling foe by the dozen, Sasori's puppets became even more ferocious. Ulquiorra was scarred and mauled by several attacks, and a few of Chiyo's puppets were cut to ribbons. Ulquiorra, slowed by the mauling of an eye, tore the object from his skull and hurled it away, allowing it to regenerate swifter. Chiyo manipulated 3 of her puppets into a pyramid, bearing seals similar to the markings for the Buddha from the Shinigami dimension, and unleashed a strange technique. "Sanbo Kyukai," she declared, sucking a large swath of the red-clad puppets into a vortex, crushing them into scrap. The blue-balled puppet began to shoot the long spiked coils from its head, impaling a few of the enemy puppets. Ulquiorra fired a ball at Sasori, forcing the man to leap away, distracting him enough for Chiyo to move the Cyclopean puppet into position. It opened its mouth and fired a small orb of some beige chakra-based material. Ulquiorra grabbed the orb and hit Sasori with it. Chiyo screamed. Ulquiorra, bemused by the idea of the object having the power to stop Sasori, nevertheless grabbed the orb, and using Sonido appeared before the man. Sasori's eyes widened as Ulquiorra punched his fist into his chest and the orb exploded. The force of the condensed chakra releasing was enough to push Ulquiorra back a few paces as Sasori was flung through the air and impaled to the wall by the rapidly expanding lion-headed chakra seal. The red-clad puppets all began to fall from the sky, their threads severed. Ulquiorra knocked aside one that was about to fall on him and glared at Sasori's corpse. The head lolled to the side drunkenly. Ulquiorra snorted and rested the spine of Murcielago against his shoulder as he let out a long exhalation. Sasori was one tough foe. Gaara, he had to hurry. Chiyo-sama, I must save Gaara, he began before a blinding, searing pain erupted across his torso and head, like lances of white fire. He fell to his knees and covered his face with a hand. A fallen puppet stood up. Sasori smiled at him. Your regeneration is incredible, but what you didn't know is that every grain of sand, every blade and every single weapon was coated in a poison so virulent that nothing can stop its march. You're dead, Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra groaned despite himself, forcing himself to stand up. Silence, Sasori. I am not dead yet. Sasori picked up a katana from the sand and attacked him. Slowed by the poison, Ulquiorra and Sasori's blade skill was finally matched. Ulquiorra was forced onto the defensive as Sasori sliced at his throat with the sword, moving his blade in simple yet efficient movements which knocked aside Murcielago at every opportunity. Ulquiorra, realizing that he had to force the poison from his body with regeneration, allowed Sasori to impale him in the shoulder, before reaching out with his left hand and holding him there. As Sasori struggled, Ulquiorra forced more and more Ryotsu into his regeneration, forcing his body to regenerate faster. Soon the undiluted pain was gone, replaced by a dull ache, then the cold feeling of mortal flesh. He raised Murcielago again and snorted. Your poison has been assimilated. You were a worthy foe, Akasuna no Sasori. And so saying, he drove Murcielago into the coil and pierced through Sasori's mortal remnants. Sasori gazed down at the blade run through his chest and let out a long rattling sigh. Ulquiorra twisted the blade savagely and drew it bloodied from the coil. He looked about the destruction and saw the small opening of the tunnel leading down into the depths of the earth. Without hesitation he flew down the tunnel, leaving Sasori to fall into the arms of the mother and the father. Deidara glanced up the tunnel. Sasori had left an hour or so ago, and had still not returned. It worried him somewhat. He returned his gaze back to the ritual as he felt a presence shoot down the passageway. "Well, Sasori, how did it go, he asked without looking round. "I heard some pretty big explosions earlier, He stopped suddenly when he realized that all the rest of Akatsuki had paused in the midst of the ritual and were looking behind him. He turned and saw a teenager with pure white skin and emerald green eyes. He had a hole in his chest but was speeding towards him like a thunderbolt, as if the lack of a heart did not affect him. Deidara's smirk widened a fraction as he threw out a few explosive C1 hawks which flew towards the stranger, only to be cut down with blinding accuracy and detonated harmlessly behind the boy, so fast did he move. Deidara sidestepped as the boy hacked at his head, but he still lost his arm, severed cleanly in the single strike. Deidara's eyes widened as the boy, with a casual and detached brutality, grabbed the arm from midair and swung the amputated limb into Deidara's face, hurling him away. Deidara fell to the floor in the corner of the vault, holding his amputated limb in a confused daze. He looked up to see the stranger gazing at the Akatsuki, standing over Gaara. A subtle movement from the leader gave him permission to flee. Grabbing a small lever hidden in the rock, Deidara opened a small passageway and slipped out. "That boy is a cunt, Nagato gazed down at the stranger in interest. "I see that you must have killed Sasori," he mused, "though how you still live with a hole like that in your chest, I have no idea." "A useful ability though." Kisame grinned. "Who are you, Baka?" The stranger turned his gaze to the former Kiri Nen. "I am Cypher Ulquiorra, the Quarto Espada. I am here for Gaara. He's here to rescue the Jinchuriki?" Strange, Nagato thought, closing his eyes for a moment. Ulquiorra looked down at the cage and then pointed a hand at the statue behind Gaara. Nagato saw a small green orb begin to grow at the end of his finger. He didn't think much of it at first, but then the Rinnegan allowed him to see the distortion around the boy. He seemed to exist in that unique place, inhabited only by the Edo Tensei, yet he seemed to be alive as well. Bizarrely, his existence was a cross between that of the living and of the half-life of the Edo Tensei. Nagato, a moment before the orb grew to full capacity, at the size of a dove's egg, realized the danger of the attack. He reached out and called away the Gedo Mazo, leaving the holographic Akatsuki floating in midair. The orb fired, releasing a blast of energy that tore the rear of the cave apart. Nagato's eyes widened in surprise, though he kept the diva path from showing his surprise as they all gazed at the boy as he picked up Gaara gently, like an older brother holding a sleeping sibling. Ulquiorra looked up at them coldly and let out a long hiss. "You must work harder, Akatsuki. The Jinchuriki have had enough." And he vanished. The holograms winked out of existence, and within the innermost sanctum of Omegacure, the members of Akatsuki looked at one another. Kisame was the first to speak. "Was he an Edo Tensei?" "No," murmured Itachi. "He was one of the living. Though it doesn't explain his whole," added Kurozetsu. Pain raised a hand. "It doesn't matter who he is. He has killed Sasori and prevented the extraction of the Ichibi. We must find and terminate him before he damages us any further. A new order is issued. Find and kill Cypher Ulquiorra." Ulquiorra returned to Chiyo, holding Gaara gently in his arms. Chiyo sat amid the rubble, her grandson lying in between the mother and father, who were holding his hands. Tears ran down her face, though she remained stoically silent. Ulquiorra stood beside her, gazing down at Sasori. "He created those puppets to fill the void that Kakashi's father made?" he asked at last. "Yes, they were the first puppets he made. He would stand in between them for hours, locked in a pseudo-embrace. I even made a jutsu to bring them to life, but he left before I could show him." Ulquiorra tilted his head as he looked at Sasori. The boy looked happy and peaceful. A hawk flew through the air, alighting near the three puppets. It looked down at the family and then let out its shrill cry, opening its wings before rising into the air and flying across the sun, turning into a shadow of gold in the yellow fire. Ulquiorra watched it go, then looked away, his eyes hurting and his hole itching. I see. He is with them now though." Chiyo turned to look at him. He is lucky, Chiyo-sama. Death is not a pain, but a release. Besides, he did his duty to the end. That is the mark of a man. Ulquiorra walked away across the river and laid Gaara on the grass, sitting down opposite him. Chiyo looked between Ulquiorra and Sasori. A small smile grew on her face. She stood and placed a kiss on Sasori's forehead, before drawing out a scroll and sealing the puppets. The hawk gave one more cry. Gaara's dream was one of impenetrable darkness and shadows. He felt a cold feeling in the back of his mind, like Shukaku was stretching his reach across his conscious. Finally, his dream changed to one of arms encircling him in gentle embrace, like an older sibling holding him. He smiled gently. A hawk cried in the distance. Suddenly the peace was shattered like a mirror falling from a great height. The world turned into a never-ending desert of red sand beneath a black sky and a bloody moon. Shukaku lay in his lake of crimson before him. His eyes were wide with fear, looking at the moon. "Shukaku? Shush. He's here." "Who?" asked Gaara, worried. "He wants you to be safe," Shukaku continued, his eyes still bent upon the moon. "He asks that I help you. He asks that we work together." Ulquiorra, dressed in a robe from one of the fallen Jiki Chikamatsu no Shu, sat on a rock as Chiyo healed Gaara. He was deep inside the cage's subconscious, speaking with Shukaku. He had arrived there through the use of Jinzen combined with his own power. He wasn't truly there, rather he was projecting his words to the Ichibi. He was sure the creature understood. It was nearly quaking in fear. From that reaction, he guessed that he was stronger than a Biju in some respects. "Ulquiorra," Chiyo whispered. Gaara was stirring. The coma that the Akatsuki had placed on him was deep and heavy, but Chiyo had dealt with it before the sun had passed halfway towards the sunset. Gaara's eyes flickered open. He looked around himself in confusion. He turned and saw Chiyo. "Chiyo-sama? Where?" Chiyo laid her hand on his shoulder and smiled. It made her look a completely different person. "Welcome back, Gaara-sama. The Akatsuki kidnapped you and brought you here to Kawa no Kuni." "Kawa no Kuni? Akatsuki? But, Shukaku is still within me." Chiyo gestured to Ulquiorra. "Your old friend, Ulquiorra-san helped." Gaara turned to stare at Ulquiorra. His face twisted into a snarl. "I don't know him." Chiyo started. "But," he said. "I lied," Ulquiorra declared. Chiyo looked as if he had driven a blade into her back. Gaara and she stood, raising their hands. "Who are you, Ulquiorra?" demanded Gaara. Ulquiorra looked down at his feet. "I am an old friend, Gaara." He drew Murcielago from his sheath in a single fluid movement and held it before him. "I know pain, Gaara." The sand curled about him. "I know the agony of your existence. I suffered as you suffered. But even as you stepped into the darkness, I walked in the light." A dove swooped low through the trees, hounded by a falcon. "I remember running through fields of grass to catch a butterfly. I remember tripping and losing it. I remember much." Gaara's sand was curling around his feet now. "I remember being driven from warmth and firelight and into the coldness of the night. I remember what it is to dream." The sand hesitated. Gaara and Ulquiorra's eyes met. His eyes, though Gaara, suddenly, they see emptiness. Nothing exists under his gaze. "I remember a dream. To be the first among my peers, the Hokage. Datbeo." Gaara felt his heart skip a beat. The world tilted on its axis and shuddered beneath his feet. "Impossible. You were executed," he whispered, disbelieving, tears gathering in the corner of his eyes. Ulquiorra pulled down the neck of the robe, revealing the hole through his chest. Gaara felt the tears fall. "Naruto?" Chiyo stared in shock at Ulquiorra. He nodded. "Yes. What's left of him, at any rate." Gaara fell on his rump staring at Ulquiorra. "How? You died 3 years ago. They said." Ulquiorra shrugged. "Hitaki Kakashi and the village were altering reports, showing Uchiha Sasuke to be the hero and me the fool. My last mission was to bring him back to Konoha after he defected. However, I was executed to ensure his loyalty by giving him the Mangekyo Sharingan. Needless to say, my imminent execution changed my mind on our friendship, scuppering that scheme. After I died, due to my insane chakra and my despair and rage, I broke through the walls of reality and entered the afterlife of another dimension." Gaara and Chiyo gazed at him in a mix of awe and confusion. "In this other dimension, souls require shepherding to paradise or hell." Souls that so not move on fast enough mutate into a hollow, a lot soul. We lose our hearts, he pointed at his chest, the remains of which become the mask we wear to hide our identities. In order to survive we must devour other souls. Wait, Gaara interrupted. Are you saying you devoured the souls of humans? Humans, hollows and Shinigami. The Shinigami are the ones who shepherd the souls of the dead. How could you do so, Naruto? Ulquiorra tilted his head to gaze at Gaara. My name is Ulquiorra. I left behind much of my past life, as one does when one becomes a hollow. I became a beast of instinct. I had to eat souls to survive. Eventually I reached the pinnacle of the hollow evolution, that of the Vasto Lords. What you see before you is the amalgamation of nearly several 100,000 souls. He stood. Shio looked at him with sad eyes, laying a hand on Gaara's shoulder. I understand that you needed to consume souls, as does Gaara. What you must realize is that it sounds very unpleasant. It is. However, what you must be wondering, Gaara, is why I do not appear as I once did. Yes, Gaara murmured. The despair, as well as losing the Kyuubi and breaking through the walls of reality, warped me, as did the natural process of hollow evolution. And as I said, I wanted to abandon as much of my past as humanly possible, he finished. Ulquiorra looked along the edge of Murcielago and glared at the point. Ulquiorra sheathed the sword and ran a hand over the saya. Silence settled over the group as swallows swooped low overhead. At last, Shio broke the silence. Ulquiorra, how did you return? I'm probably the luckiest man in existence. Ryo-sama, the supreme god of all existence, offered me another chance after I died as a hollow. Yes, the dead die in that dimension. A hollow dies and enters hell or paradise, depending on their life as a human. That is neither here nor there though, as I shall never return to that dimension. I died in battle against Kurosaki Ichigo, whom I mentioned in the fight with Sasori. By that time I had sworn allegiance to a former Shinigami, called Aizen-sama. I was transformed into the form you see before you, though I had the remains of my mask on my head. After I died in that form I was brought to Ryo-sama, who gave me another chance at life here. Why did you accept? This place has only brought you sorrow, asked Gaara. Ulquiorra's lips twitched. I have a few good memories and a desire for revenge and change. That was enough. Gaara stood up and walked over to him, scowling. Ulquiorra looked up at him and started as Gaara stuck out his hand. Ulquiorra glanced between Gaara and the hand. Naruto sat a little way of smiling. Ulquiorra finally grabbed the hand and shook it warmly. Welcome home, Ulquiorra. You must keep up the alliance with Konoha for the moment, Ulquiorra said as they prepared to move off. Gaara and Shio started. They had assumed that with the return of the former Jinchuriki that they would fight against Konoha. Ulquiorra gestured to the ruins of the lair. I need to plan and prepare for the battle with Konoha. This fight proved to me my superiority over most shinobi, even of S rank, even with the limit of a mortal body. But I still need to grow stronger, and gain more allies. Gaara ground his teeth, but he still nodded. Very well Ulquiorra, I can put up with them for a little longer. But remember the people of K's no Kuni are dying, as are many others. Do not wait too long. I won't. He picked up Chio in a piggyback again and took Gaara's shoulder. Come, what the hell was that? Gasped Gaara when they stopped. The advantages of being a hollow allow me to manipulate spiritual energy, or Ryotsu. This allows me to use sonido, or sound ceremony, in this tongue. It allows incredibly fast movement for very little energy. Are you fit to continue? Gaara looked queasy, but nodded. A little way over the border of K's no Kuni, Ulquiorra stopped. His Pesquisa sensed someone up ahead. Team 7, he said coldly. Gaara looked at him sidelong. What was your story of our friendship? Before and after the Chunin exams. Right. They all sat amid the sand and Chio prepared a fire, and began to cook some rabbit over the flames. She sprinkled some seasoning on it and sat back, watching the meal closely. Gaara looked over at Ulquiorra, and then sighed darkly, his sand twitching, revealing his worry. A minute or so later, Team 7 landed beside them. They started at the sight of Gaara, but they quickly recovered, though their body language told Gaara that they had wanted to rescue him. He was sincerely grateful that Naruto Ulquiorra had found him first. Case-Cage-sama, Kakashi said, bowing, it's good to see you in one piece. Gaara inclined his head. Shukaku stretched his claws out and surrounded his mind like a shield, just as he had said he would. "Thank you," he replied. He glanced back at the fire. "Would you like to join us?" "Thank you, we would," Kakashi answered. Team 7 all sat down amid the camp, and an awkward hush fell over them. Ulquiorra had to restrain himself from beheading them all. His replacement looked up at him and smiled. "I take it you killed Sasori, Cypher-kun?" "Yes." Team 7 started at that. "Impressive," said Kakashi. He secretly wondered at the power of the kid's Kekkei Genkai. Ulquiorra shrugged. Sakura looked at him quizzically. "He only destroyed your clothes? Wow, we must have underestimated him." Kakashi nodded and Sasuke smirked slightly. Ulquiorra snorted. "He was a powerful foe. You would have had great difficulty dueling him." Kakashi frowned and placed a hand on Sasuke's shoulder, restraining him somewhat. "I doubt that, Cypher-san." "Enough. My name is Ulquiorra. There is no title," Ulquiorra interrupted. Shio leant forward and took the rabbit from the spit and cut it into 7 pieces, giving one to each of the others. "As you wish, Ulquiorra," said Kakashi, confused. They ate in silence. "How powerful was he then?" asked Sasuke. He commanded 100 puppets at once and had changed the corpse of the third cage into a human puppet, letting him use his unique iron sand powers. Ulquiorra glared at Gaara as he choked on his rabbit and spat it over his robe. Ulquiorra flicked it away and resumed eating. "How did you kill him?" asked Sasuke. "I stabbed him," came the terse reply. As they sat in silence, Shio finally spoke. "I apologize for the trouble you went through, Hitaki-san. Had Ulquiorra been here sooner, we needn't have called you." Ulquiorra's lips quirked slightly. Kakashi waved a hand. "Ah, it doesn't matter. It was interesting to see such a powerful Kekkei Genkai. Speaking of which," he said, trying to sound casual, "Ulquiorra, those eyes." Ulquiorra turned to look at him. "Yes? What is up with them?" "No offense, but they are freaky," said the stranger, smiling. Ulquiorra shrugged. "A mild mutation that is part of the Kekkei Genkai." "Dojutsu?" asked Sakura. "Of a kind, though I advise against attempting to kill me and steal the eye, Hitaki." Kakashi's smile faltered a moment, then widened. "Oh, come on Ulquiorra. Do I really look like I would?" Ulquiorra snorted and rubbed his arm. He sighed. "This is more tortuous than dealing with Neutra." After the meal was finished, the 7 of them stood and prepared to move. Kakashi sighed and rubbed the back of his head. "Well, I hope you don't mind, but this is still partly our mission, so we're going to help escort the cage back." "As you wish," Gaara replied. "Ulquiorra, will you be able to?" "No, 6 others would be a bit much. We'll have to walk." That was true, but he'd rather have as little physical contact with his former comrades as possible. They moved off, walking at a steady pace. By the time the sun had set proper, and the stars were glimmering high above, they were about halfway to Suna. Ulquiorra volunteered for guard duty and stood by the fire as the others slept. As the moon reached its zenith, he heard one of the others stir. The moonlight fell, illuminating Ulquiorra and Shio as she stood beside him. She had her hands folded inside her robes, and was clicking her tongue. "Why not now? I wish to leave it a little longer." Shio nodded. "Before he died, Sasori offered me some information for you." Ulquiorra raised an eyebrow and tilted his head to look at her. Sasori had a spy, working under Orochimaru. Orochimaru? Yes. He was meant to meet him in a few days' time on the Tenchi Bridge in Kusagakure. Ulquiorra bowed his head in thanks. "I thought it would have been a good idea to grab Sasori's cloak and the puppet he wore, so I brought them with me in the sealing scroll." "Good. I'll need them." Shio was just about to ask if he was seriously going up against Orochimaru, but then, they'd all said that about Sasori and Deidara. Of course. They returned to Suna to find the village in jubilation. Ulquiorra and Shio were heralded as heroes, and many Jonin bowed to the 2 of them as bouquets of flowers were thrown into the air and the people cheered. Ulquiorra honestly felt overwhelmed by it all, especially when, against his protestations and his dire words, he was picked up a cloud of sand and he, Gaara and Shio floated through Suna. The 2 of them proclaimed as Shiro Ken to Ningyo no Ju, the White Sword and the Puppet Queen. Team 7 watched, the 3 Chunin jealous of the accolades heaped upon Ulquiorra, while Kakashi hurriedly wrote a message to Tsunade, sending the messenger bird in a flutter of wings from the ambassadorial suite in the cage building. Tamari and Kankuro hugged their brother, thanking Shio and Ulquiorra many times. Ulquiorra brushed their comments off as they were escorted to the top of the cage office, where Gaara waved to the people of Suna and gestured up Ulquiorra, who received more applause. After nearly an hour of celebration, the situation calmed somewhat and a feast was declared, to be held in the middle of the village. Ulquiorra turned to Gaara and asked, "Gaara, may I leave? I need to get out of this robe." Gaara nodded. "Yes, wait in my office and I'll send in some clothes for you." Ulquiorra thanked him and left, the robe billowing out behind him. When they arrived, the clothes surprised him. There was a pair of pale beige trousers, tight-fitting like most shinobi dress, with a pair of cotton or similar underwear. There was a black undershirt, over which went a pure white long-sleeved shirt, with a sand-colored tunic to go over that. There was a pair of black sandal boots similar to what most shinobi wore. There was also a pair of leather vambraces covered in light steel marked with the emblem of Suna on each. A gray belt went around his waist, with a few knapsacks and containers to hold various implements and pieces of equipment. He glanced at himself once he was dressed. He missed his old espada uniform, but then again, he was no longer part of Aizen-sama's army. "I suppose it is better for moving through the shinobi nations." Ulquiorra left the office, sheathing Murcielago through the belt as he did so, walking from the building to the center of the village, where the celebration was in full swing. Gaara and the others looked up from the table and Gaara waved him over to sit beside him. Ulquiorra did so, looking very awkward and uncomfortable. The food was excellent. The Suna Nin were genial hosts and Ulquiorra rapidly consumed enough to feed a normal shinobi for a whole day, and bearing in mind that shinobi needed more food than normal people, Ulquiorra was soon the center of attention. The Sand siblings were practically sweat-dropping while the Konoha Nin were looking at him in a mixture of disgust and amusement. Ulquiorra finished and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Well, your appetite seems unchanged, Ulquiorra." "Nonsense, I eat like 10 men. My keke genkai is apparently taking a higher toll on my body than I initially thought," Ulquiorra replied. As he spoke, a man came from the shadows and offered Kakashi a letter. He opened it and read it quickly. Gaara looked over at him and the skin around his eyes tightened. Kakashi cleared his throat. "Tsunade-sama is very glad to hear you are alive and well, Kasuke-sama. She expresses her good wishes for your continued health." Gaara inclined his head. "She was also interested in Ulquiorra," Kakashi added. Ulquiorra's cup spilt a little sake. "I wrote to her of the Kasuke's rescue. She wishes to invite you to Konoha, Ulquiorra. I hope I haven't overstepped my place." Ulquiorra was silent, deep in careful and yet worried thought. "They probably wish to recruit me in some manner. Probably seduce me with riches and power. Should I accept? A genjutsu would prove little trouble, I would imagine. However, perhaps I should go. I should see what Konoha is like now and if I should spare anyone." Hinata's beautiful face entered his mind, her smile dazzling and pure as she folded her arms about him and placed her lips to his. "Perhaps," Ulquiorra responded, motioning to Gaara and Chiyo to remain calm. "I will come to Konoha." The Konoha Nin all relaxed and took on the air of peacocks ruffling their feathers. The Sand siblings and the heads of Suna all looked uncomfortable. Ulquiorra stood and bowed to Gaara. "Forgive me, Gaara, but I have to leave." Gaara started. "Ulquiorra, you only just arrived. What do you need to do?" Ulquiorra's lips twitched as Chiyo handed him a sealing scroll. "I have a snake to deal with." And he vanished. A bat flew across the moon. Hinata curled her fingers into the futon covering, crying into the soft material. The several cuts across her back burned viciously as blood trickled from the wounds. She lay in silence, her breathing harsh. Her father had been incensed by the wanton desecration of the yukata. He had attacked her back with a willow rod, leaving several lacerations over back. He had confined her to her room and left her to her tears. She stood up and limped to the shrine, opening it and sobbing openly. She knelt before the picture and kissed it. Naruto-kun, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. They want me to marry Sasuke to get the Rinnegan from our children. Naruto-kun, please forgive me." Tears and mucus mixed as she sobbed and held herself tightly. She reached out and picked up the tanto. "I won't let him touch me. I'll be with you soon, Naruto-kun. I promise." But first she had to destroy Sasuke and her father. "He will not have me." A month later, Hinata left her room, her step light but her brow heavy. Today was the day. She would play out the final test and then all would be ready. She was dressed in her normal shinobi uniform with the few additions that she had been making over the last few months. The tanto hanging at her waist and the summoning scroll at her hip were just two of the many changes she had made. As ever, when in public, her hair was pulled into a long ponytail. She walked through the busy mid-morning streets of Konoha, heading to the training grounds to meet with the rest of the Chunin. She came to the open field of Training Ground 34 and raised her hand, saluting Kiba. He growled in acknowledgement, rubbing Akamaru's neck glumly. He had changed quite a bit since Naruto had died. He bore a long scar across his cheek, which twisted and convulsed as he moved his jaw, a memento of a wild battle against a berserk Iwa Nen. Shino stood nearby, a cloud of insects swarming about him. He was watching them with a worried air, as if something about them disturbed him. He nodded to her, still focused on his insects. Rock Lee and Tenten were fiddling with their equipment. Rock Lee looking wilder with his slightly shaggier hair, while Tenten was unchanged. The Ino Shika Cho looked the same as ever. Choji was still stuffing his face like it was his last meal and Shikamaru looked as droll as ever before. They acknowledged her presence and the group all gathered about, dividing into the two prearranged teams. Team 8 formed up, Tenten joining the ranks, while Team 10 was accompanied by Rock Lee, who cracked his knuckles. They often did this, the 8 of them meeting for these training matches, which invariably led to widespread destruction. The training field was a wide green plain, with forests surrounding it, with a small river running through it and falling over the cliff of the western side in a sparkling waterfall. Shikamaru clicked his fingers a few times, before sticking out a hand. As he did so, Shino did the same, his bugs coalescing about the fist. Shikamaru smiled thinly and a kunai appeared in his fingers, flicking it calmly at Hinata. She didn't even have to activate her Byakugan. She reached out with her left hand and, wrapping a little chakra around her fingertips and the heel of her palm, hit the tip of the blade with the tips of her fingers, spinning it up and away, before spinning and striking it with the heel of her palm, sending it straight at Choji. He hurriedly stepped back to avoid impalement. And so, the preliminaries out of the way, the training began. Tenten and Shino began their long-range duel with Ino and Shikimaru, blades and Kakaichu becoming a shield and deterrent, holding the Nara shadow possessing jutsu and the Yamanka mind control techniques at bay. Choji and Kiba were busy fighting, the sheer size and strength of the Akamichi more than a match for the wild and ferocious attacks of the Inuzuka as they jeweled on the water. Rock Lee meanwhile was hurling himself at her, his fists rotating back for a twin-linked punch. She activated her Byakugan quickly, hurling herself forward, raising her hands to block the two well-aimed punches at her skull. He smiled and leapt back, swinging his legs at her in a powerful double kick. She swerved away, before spinning back like a dancer and striking at his knee, sending a sliver of chakra into the tenketsu. Lee leapt back, glaring at his leg. If there was one way to slow down Lee, aside from an excessive amount of chakra-infused sand or an unhealthy amount of violence, it was to stop the tenketsu. Seeing an opening in his limb, which due to the Byakugan she could tell was genuine, Hinata sped forward, striking at his chest in a flurry of attacks. He blocked most of them, and she forced him back across the river to the other bank. Lee was surprised at her power. Neji hit harder than this, yet he was being pushed back quicker than with Neji. Of course, that was part of the trap for Hinata-chan. Hinata felt something gather around her feet. She had been so focused on taking out Lee that she hadn't kept her eye on Shikamaru. Kage Nui no Jutsu, he cried in triumph, trapping her with a dozen shadow spikes. She glowered at him. Lee shot past her, running to attack Shino. She smiled thinly. Time for Plan B. Shikamaru frowned as Hinata began to move on her own. His jutsu should have prevented her moving independently, but she was still able to move, despite the several shadow blades piercing her. She flicked out a kunai, which he easily dodged, noticing too late the smokescreen tag. A large gray cloud of fog expanded outwards enveloping him. He turned around, searching the dense fog for any sight of Hinata. She will still be trapped by my jutsu, I hope. He drew his tanto and dropped into a defensive position. A few flies landed across his back and shoulders, but he ignored them. After a minute or so, the fog lifted. Hinata was standing right in front of him, her fist glowing with chakra. His sweat dropped. He had about half a second in which to think, fuck, before he was hit with enough force to break his nose and dislocate his jaw. He flew back a good dozen paces, crashing into the water and floundering out a little way down the river. Hinata turned and blocked the overhead downwards cut from Choji's expanded fist. She spun out her foot, driving it into his considerable stomach. She smiled slightly. He fell back, winded, and she resumed her assault, striking with the speed of a cobra. She tapped a few of the tenketsu, shutting them off, before swinging out a foot and smashing him across the jaw, sending him back for Kiba and Akamaru to attack with their gatsuga, driving him into the dirt. Ino, realizing her plight, attempted to fire off some more of her explosive tags in her flower blasts. However, this was stopped by Tenten's summoning of several dozen blades, which she sent flying at Ino, who was forced to flee to prevent impalement. Lee, still attempting to break through Shino's shield of insects, much as he had done 3 years ago against Gaara, saw that the battle was nearly lost. He leapt away, flicking off the weights and hurling them at Kiba, who fell down with a comical expression as they clipped his head. Hinata and Lee leapt at each other. Hinata knew that she would be no match for Lee. Well, if she hadn't developed this technique, that is. She began to allow more of Lee's attacks through, and grimaced through the pain. She reached out and began to attack Lee in return, hitting him with a single finger each time, but hiding it to look like she was striking with more digits. As his leg drove into her stomach, she spat blood and drove the index finger of her right hand into his forehead. Lee hung still for a minute, and then he was flung back, his tongue lolling and his eyes comically confused. She stood up straight and wiped the blood from her mouth. Her comrades were staring at her in awe and surprise. She giggled and dropped into her normal nervous position, tapping her fingers together. Choji stood up and rubbed his head. "How the hell did you do that, Hinata-chan?" he asked, picking up Kiba and Akamaru. "It was nothing," she muttered. Shikamaru laughed. "Like hell. That was one serious taijutsu. How long have you known that technique?" "A while," she lied. "It's just a gentle fist technique." The others shook their heads and Ino began to heal their various injuries. When Lee woke up a little later, he shot up to Hinata and gave her his classic, nice guy, pose. "That was a mighty technique, Hinata-chan. A most youthful attack. Please, Kami, shut him up," growled Kiba. They all laughed as Lee pouted. Shino glanced at his Kakaichu. "So, what did we learn from this exercise?" he asked as they sat or stood on the grass on the northern bank. Tenten shrugged. "My aim was a little off today. I need to redistribute weight amid my weapons. Me and Akamaru need to put on more weight." "What? We need more muscle. I need to add a little more vitamin to my diet." "Kiba's attack nearly broke my arm, and Hinata-chan nearly busted my gut," put in Choji, rubbing the organ in question. "My Kakaichu have been inactive for too long. I need to use them more. Their baseline chakra from consumption of the local area is too low, making them of little use at the beginning of the battle because their chakra is insufficient." The commonly held opinion was that Shino used his bugs too much, but no one wanted to have a female suddenly latch on and be chased by a horde of Kakaichu. "I need to get a little closer. My taijutsu and mind-controlled jutsu are better off paired together. At long range, I can only use my tags and petal bombs. I need to increase my weights. I need to be faster to avoid that attack again." Shikamaru rubbed the back of his head. "I need to work on my shadow jutsu." When it was clear he would volunteer no more, all eyes fell on Hinata. "I don't see any problems with your performance," Shino said. He sounded a little proud, if Aburame allowed emotions into their voice. Hinata shook her head. "No, I need to get stronger." "You knocked me out," Lee pointed out. "But it needs to be a stronger attack," she said coldly. She stood up and bowed her head. "Gomenasai, but I had to go." Before any of them could speak, she had run off, leaping through the trees. Shikamaru rubbed his jaw. "Well, this is all kinds of fucked up," Kiba said angrily. "What? Don't tell me you didn't notice?" "Enlighten us," drawled Shikamaru. "Well, different emotions cause releases of different chemicals in the bloodstream, right?" Well, Hinata-chan stank of aggression just now. "So, what, she wanted to kill Lee?" "No, what I mean is that she probably was using Lee as an experiment to see how much more powerful that technique needs to get." Shikamaru queried. Kiba nodded. They all fell silent, even the insects. They all knew what that meant. Lee's natural taijutsu skill made him one of the toughest shinobi in the village. An attack that knocked Lee out for a few minutes would probably put most people in a coma for a week. Well, she's taking this as we anticipated. They all agreed with Tenten's observation. When the news of the marriage between Hinata and Sasuke had been announced, even Shino had been disturbed. Kiba had gone berserk. Hinata herself, well, it didn't take a genius to know what she was going through. For the last few months her hair had been held up in a long, regal ponytail at her father's command. Her training had taken on a new level of violence, both in the Hyuga clan and in the training fields. It wasn't uncommon for Asuma or Kurenai to drag her from the field, her eyes wide and spitting blood. The constant feeling around her was of boiling sadness and despair. Shikamaru closed his eyes. Since Naruto's execution, murder, Hinata had changed. She had become more melancholy and withdrawn than before. She seemed to run on autopilot, fighting, training and even talking with a detached air. Shikamaru was never one for believing in fate, but the way she acted, he really did believe in the red string. And that's when it hit him. He stood up, careful not to alarm the others. Moping won't do no good. I'll talk to her. See ya. He waved and walked off. Once he was sure he was out of earshot and sight, he ran. He caught up with Hinata in the forest around Konoha, on the path leading to the village. Hinata-chan, wait. She turned as he ran up to her, panting. That gentle fist technique, that's not a normal technique. I've never heard of anything like that. You pour chakra into a single digit, and release it in a huge blast into the tenketsu. That's what you used on me. I thought they were flies. Hinata said nothing, but looked worried and afraid. He looked her dead in the eye. If you poured enough chakra into a single blow, due to the condensed attack, you could blow a man's heart. So tell me, who do you want to kill? Her eyes widened, and then slowly, they hardened. It was a look so alien on her sweet angelic face that he felt a shiver crawl up his spine. She turned and stared at the sky. I want and I need to kill my father and Uchiha Sasuke. A rabbit huddling in the undergrowth was attacked by a snake and died in agony. A cherry blossom fell and landed in between them. The sun was hidden behind a dark cloud. Shikamaru opened his mouth and said 4 words, "Holy shit, you're serious?" She nodded. What the hell? Hinata, why? She hissed. She pointed at him. 3 years ago they killed Naruto-kun. The only man. She closed her eyes and sobbed. She held her face in her hands and wept like a child. Shikamaru was silent, tears gathering in his own eyes. No one knew it, but on the day Naruto died, he'd slit his wrists. Naruto had been his friend, a good friend. Hell, he, Shikamaru and Choji were the dead losses of the class. They were like family. He had abandoned his brother to die. To hell with him being a traitor, a subhuman Jinchuriki, and to hell with his attempted murder of Sasuke. Shikamaru had left him to die. He'd only survived because he was such a coward. Shikamaru, Choji, Ino, Lee, Tenten, the Konohamaru Corps and Shino and Kiba stood by the small gravestone in the cemetery. Naruto's resting place was alone amid a wide dark corner. No one came here, so they were confident that it wouldn't be besmirched by the ingrates of the village. Choji had thinned considerably over the last few days and Ino looked deeply disturbed. Kiba was rubbing at his eyes angrily, snarling with sadness and rage. Shino was hard to read but the buzzing of his kakaichu was subdued. Konohamaru was sobbing, but his fists were clenched angrily at his sides. Asuma and Kurenai stood a little way off, Asuma smoking, his arm around her waist. Shikamaru looked over at Lee. He had his arms folded over his chest and was looking at the gravestone with a detached air, his eyes glazed. Tenten sat a little way behind them, fiddling with a kunai. As the sun slowly set behind them, Kurenai guided Konohamaru away, looking back at them worriedly. Asuma leant his head back and let out a rasping sigh. The last time someone was executed as a traitor was 30-odd years back. The girl killed a member of the Hyuga main house after being hired by Iwa. He turned and hurled the butt of the cigarette away. Her family was ostracized and forced into a small corner of the village and left there, under the orders of the fourth. You know, I think they're still there. He walked away, humming a dirge under his breath. Shino was the first to speak. Because of the social stigma, I believe he is saying that those left behind by the traitor suffer most. Shikamaru nodded. Hinata-chan, she finally got her dearest wish, only for it to be snatched away from her. He turned to look at them all. A grim, Fei look settled over his eyes. Naruto is gone, we're what he left behind. He made it his nin do to protect everyone else and to take care of his friends. Kiba caught on swifter than the others. He drew a kunai and drew a droplet of blood from the tip of his finger. Well, it's kinda fitting if we protect what he protected, the boy said. Lee followed suit, and soon, all of them had a nicked finger and the drops of blood fell and stained the grass like crimson tears. Shikamaru looked long and hard at Hinata. He raised a shaking hand and ran it over his pallid face. Hell, if he was honest with himself, he wanted to kill a good few of the higher-ups, Sasuke and Kakashi included. If he was properly motivated, he'd kill Tsunade. He turned and groaned, but to hear Hinata reveal a sadistic desire to kill Sasuke and her father? That was something he'd never expected. Hinata looked long and hard at him, her tears red-rimmed as she slowly dropped into her battle stance. Shikamaru realized that he was standing at a crossroads, one that led to certain death on either path. 1. He could stay silent now and help Hinata in the vendetta. Or 2, he could say something to calm her, and get a fistful of death to the skull. Whatever happens, there is gonna be a whole lot of work, he grumbled to himself. Shikamaru raised his hands peacefully. Fine, fine, you win. His face turned sadistic. I'll help you. Hinata started and slowly smiled herself. Shikamaru was surprised at himself. He had just signed on to kill 2 clan heads and anyone who got in the way, and it wasn't even midday. Ahem, they both turned to see the others. Each was bearing a grim and fey look. Kiba grinned madly. We've been silent too long, murmured Shino. Because of our silence and cowardice, this village slips ever closer to dominion. The others all were silent, but their cold eyes and set jaws revealed their determination. Lee shrugged. We may die, but we'll go with the fires of our youth burning like stars. Hinata smiled at them, her eyes shining. Danzo watched the Chunin leave. He was surprised that the Lady Hyuga hadn't seen him with her Byakugan. Then again, he hadn't expected the girl to be a traitor, nor indeed the majority of the Konoha 10. He had been following the Hyuga girl for these last few years, ever since one of his Anbu had discovered the shrine in the girl's room. He had decided to take the duty of watching her himself, mainly because it was too important to let anyone else do it, and partly. Danzo watched them leave in silence. He didn't desire conflict, not to the scale of what Suande was doing. He had always dreamed of a united shinobi world, with Konoha leading it, not Konoha ruling the world alone. He had had great plans for the Uzumaki lad. With the power of the Kyuubi no Yoko at their back, combined with the strength of Uchiha and Hitaki as well as the Byakugan, would have made them a great power in the fight against the Akatsuki. But because of the damn idiocy of the Hokage and the village council, he had lost the Kyuubi. Who knew how long it would take to find again? But that was neither here nor there. He had held nothing against the lad when alive. If only he had found out about Hyuga falling in love with him, he might have been able to figure out a match. A hawk dropped a mouse into the nest for her young to eat. Danzo let out a long, low, quiet sigh. He was getting too old for this. He raised his head as an Anbu member landed beside him. The woman bowed her head. Shimura-sama. Yes, he murmured. Tsunade-sama requests your presence immediately by the gates. He snorted and waved for her to follow him. They moved swiftly towards the gates and landed beside Hitaki, Tsunade and the Uchiha, as well as the various officials and nobles of Konoha. He inclined his head to them before turning to Tsunade. What is it you require, Hokage-sama? Tsunade smiled at him. Ulquiorra is nearly here. Danzo tilted his head to look through the gates. The boy had serious power, and if he joined Konoha, they would be even more powerful than before. However, the boy was unheard of. Could they trust him? Was he working for someone else? He looked over at Tsunade. Do you wish me to? No, she replied. No, not yet. Let's try to be diplomatic first. Soon, there came the sound of a large cart trundling along the road. It soon came into view. The cart was large, easily the size of a small house. It was pulled by 3 large oxen, and being steered by a young man with white hair and violet eyes. He carried a large blade over his shoulder. Hitaki and the 2 originals of Team 7 started at the sight of it. The Kabikirabocho, Hitaki whispered. Beside the cart walked a broad, strong young man with orange hair and red eyes. He seemed to be muttering under his breath and his hand twitched uncontrollably. A girl with red eyes sat beside the white-haired boy. Danzo started as he saw the Uzumaki red hair. He hadn't expected to see another one like that during his lifetime. He saw the others who knew of the Uzumaki colors start as well. She and the white-haired boy seemed to be in the middle of a heated argument, but they both stopped suddenly and turned to look inside the cart. After that they fell silent. The cart pulled to a halt a little way from the gates and the three of them grouped together by the cart, their eyes cold and hard. The cloth covering of the cart opened at the front and out stepped a man that could only be Ulquiorra. He was dressed in the clothes of Suna, but he also had a long purple cloak wrapped around him. He said a few words to the others who nodded and the white-haired one grinned widely. Ulquiorra looked up at the Konoha nin and Danzo blinked in surprise as he vanished. He started as a cold voice spoke beside him. "I trust that I have not interrupted anything?" They all spun to see Ulquiorra standing beside them. His hands were beneath the cloak and seemed to be clasping something. Tsunade stepped forward. "Welcome, Ulquiorra, to Konohagakure. I trust you are well?" "Well enough." He spoke in a curt, precise manner. Definitely trained by some strong mentor. "I wonder who?" Hitaki stepped forward. "Last time we met, you said something about dealing with a snake. What did you mean?" Ulquiorra was silent and simply opened his cape. Nearly everyone blanched as he held up Orochimaru's severed head. The man looked as if he was laughing in victory, his face frozen in ecstasy. Ulquiorra proffered it to Tsunade. "I believe you can verify it is him, Hokage-sama." The way he says that title, it's like he's spitting it at her, Danzo thought. Though he was probably the only one who thought that. They were all gazing at the severed heads like genin after the first kill. "Yes, it is him," Tsunade said quietly. "But, how can I be sure he is dead?" "Forgive the suspicion, Ulquiorra, but Orochimaru has been killed many times, and he always vomited himself out again to survive." "We need more proof," Uchiha said, his lips quirked with arrogance. The others nodded. Sure, he had killed Sasori, but what about Orochimaru? They started as his lips quirked somewhat. It looked like a smile on a shark. "I see. Well, I am glad you say so. Or else," he motioned to the others and the cart trundled forward again, "we'd have hauled this all the way here for nothing." "And what is it?" Danzo asked. He had to say, he was most interested in the boy. Ulquiorra did not reply. The cart turned about and the others opened the rear of the cart and hurriedly stepped back. A long gray-white titan of a snake, with a mane of coarse black hair and a snout of pale flesh fell out, slipping out and rolling forward at their feet. It was nearly 20 feet long, and as thick as 3 men. It had 2 great golden amber eyes, and its face, if face it be, was twisted into a rictus of mortal agony. The Konoha nin all stepped back in shock as the corpse was revealed and a few broke out in cold sweat. Danzo gazed in subdued awe at the corpse. He stepped forward and prodded the mass with his foot. "Well, so this is how he survived so long," Tsunade said. Ulquiorra nodded. "Yes, he used a jutsu to take over the bodies of those he deemed of use, and gained their abilities. Probably what he wanted to do to Uchiha-san," murmured Hyuga Hiyashi. The Uchiha looked uneasy at that. Danzo looked back at Orochimaru's face. "How did he die?" Before Ulquiorra could speak, the white-haired one interrupted, like a little bitch. Ulquiorra frowned. 1 month ago. Ulquiorra landed in the deserted village, his eyes seeking out the small house where he had spent the night, in a time that seemed half a lifetime away. Stepping inside, he opened the ceiling scroll, and placed the spare clothes the people had given him within it, and he repeated the process with the Kabikura Bocho. He sighed and turned to see Naruto looking at the sky. "Yes?" he queried fatalistically. "She'd be proud of you." They both would be. Ulquiorra's eyes widened somewhat in surprise. "What? You must kill Orochimaru quickly, Ulquiorra. Hinata? She's still waiting." And so he drifted away. Ulquiorra gazed after him before he himself vanished like dust in the wind. He journeyed across the vast expanses of the desert, landing every few miles and taking his bearings. He headed north and east, leaping across the sand in great bounds. Slowly, the golden sand faded into the distance behind him. He stopped for the night beneath the branches of a great tree on the border of the country of Ishigakure. His dreams were cold and dark and filled with bloody eyes. He started early the next day, breaking his fast on the flesh of a hare foolish enough to be caught. Soon he was traveling at top speed, speeding through the grass and forests. As the sun set he slowed and sat down at the top of a cliff, looking over a ravine. The next day, as the sun reached its zenith, he came to the forest around the Tenchi Bridge. He opened the scroll and pulled out Sasori's cloak and Hiriko. After a few moments, he was dressed. It was lucky that the puppet's control mechanisms were based around the various levers inside the construct. He scuttled from the underbrush and moved towards the bridge. He stood on it and waited. After a little while his pesquisa felt someone approach. It felt vaguely familiar. He looked up and saw a familiar face. Yakushi Kabuto. He was mildly surprised. He was under the impression that Kabuto was fanatically loyal to Orochimaru. "It's been a long time, Sasori-sama," he said. "About 5 years, am I correct? Were you followed?" Ulquiorra ground out. "It's just you and me. And Orochimaru will soon know I'm gone, so let's make this short." "As you wish," Ulquiorra growled. "Where is his hideout?" "It changes weekly. We go to a different one each week in order to avoid discovery." "I see. Where is he now?" Kabuto frowned. He gestured behind him. "Here, in Kusagakure." "I see. Yes, now give me the item you promised me. I have been here far too long." Kabuto held out his hand towards him. "Orochimaru will kill me if he finds out I've been here." Ulquiorra inclined his head. "I had better deal with him now." "Yes, I'm aware." Ulquiorra moved Hiriko's arms and pretended to reach inside his cloak. However, before he could leap at Kabuto, they both started as a cold, sibilant voice spoke. "Your conversation sounds intriguing. I hope you don't mind if I join in." "Orochimaru," murmured Ulquiorra, "you haven't changed." The serpent Sannin smiled wickedly at him. Naruto would have panicked at such a look, but Ulquiorra paid it no mind. "I remember that garb. It brings back many memories, Sasori." Ulquiorra did not reply, but instead watched Kabuto carefully as he leapt away from the Sannin to join him. Kabuto glanced at him, then swept his chakra-covered hand at him. Hiriko leapt away and Ulquiorra raised an eyebrow. "I see. It appears whatever hold I had on you once, is gone, Kabuto. You never had one. I see. Well, Orochimaru, I thank you for revealing yourself to me. It makes killing you." Ulquiorra stood and threw away the puppet and cloak, that much simpler. Kabuto and Orochimaru started. "Who are you?" asked Orochimaru. "Asuna Nen? No. I'm merely an ally of the Case Cage," Ulquiorra said. He drew his sword. "You killed Sasori?" "Yes." "Intriguing," the man murmured. He slid into a defensive position. "Well, this body is getting on a bit. Perhaps you might be good for a while. Let us see." Ulquiorra stepped forward. The sword of Kusanagi shot from Orochimaru's mouth at breathtaking speed, blocking Murcielago as it arced at his neck. Ulquiorra drew back his arm and slashed again and again, cutting Orochimaru across the face and chest. The Sannin responded in kind, driving his blade around Murcielago and into Ulquiorra's shoulder. The Espada ignored the pain and hurled himself further along the blade, driving Murcielago into the snake user's stomach. Orochimaru burst into a shower of snakes and he reappeared some way off, smirking. Ulquiorra turned and blocked a well-aimed thrust from Kabuto, kicking the man away. The power of the attack flung Kabuto through the air, crashing in the forest a good way off. Orochimaru, rather than being worried for his protégé, seemed even more intrigued. Well, it seems your taijutsu is good, and with that strength, hey, you'll be a good host," he laughed. He raised the sword in his left hand, pointing it at Ulquiorra's face. Ulquiorra said nothing and simply sonidoed in front of the Sannin. Orochimaru's eyes widened in surprise as he managed to block the blow just in time. He leapt away as Ulquiorra swung his sword at his face. Ulquiorra and Orochimaru dueled with increasing violence. The Kusanagi sword reminded Ulquiorra somewhat of Shinso, though it was a weak and laughable reflection. Ichimaru would have struck at him 6 times in the time it took Orochimaru to extend the blade once. Orochimaru swept his blade this way and that, their blades meeting for barely a moment each time, sparks flying from the impact. They dueled back and forth along the bridge, until the sun had passed 3 hours beyond midday. Both warriors had many powerful techniques they could have used to force the other into submission, but neither desired an outright victory. Orochimaru held back in order to preserve the stranger's body for later examination and experimentation. Ulquiorra held back in order to better conserve his Ryotsu. His battle against Sasori had shown him his limitations, and to go against a Sannin would require extra power and cunning. Both of them moved with a beautiful and ruthless efficiency, so much so that it didn't seem a duel so much as a dance. Both moved like water and wind, like the sea in the midst of a storm. Steel flashed like lightning as they bobbed and wove with the ferocity of dueling herons. They swept their swords with both hands and one as well, their moves precise, controlled, and deadly. Finally, the two of them broke apart. Orochimaru was sweating profusely, but grinning wildly, his tongue lolling out. Ulquiorra meanwhile was cool and collected, stoic as ever. Both their clothes were torn and shredded in places where their opposite's blade had come too close. Orochimaru began to giggle, twirling the kusanagi in his fingers. "Oh, wonderful, quite wonderful, you're incredible," he giggled. "Whoever you are marvelous. I wonder, do you have a Kekkei Genkai?" Ulquiorra nodded and sanidoed away, behind Orochimaru. The Sannin had barely enough time to widen his eyes and open his mouth in shock, before Murcielago drove into his spine and Ulquiorra kicked him away. The serpent user went flying back the way he had arrived, crashing into the forest. Ulquiorra followed him swiftly, unsure of his demise. He walked through the forest, following the path of fallen trees. He finally came across the crater caused by the Sannin's impact. "I would say that he was certainly dead, but I also believed that of Kurosaki," he thought as he looked over the crater's rim. The deep hole was empty save for a floppy and twisted sack of skin, shaped vaguely like a caricature of Orochimaru. Of course, Orochimaru has that strange body-shedding jutsu. He heard the snapping of a twig behind him and swung around, blocking the kusanagi with the hierro of his forearm. Orochimaru gazed in wonder at Ulquiorra. "You can block a sword strike with your skin. Most interesting," he muttered, drawing his sword back and jabbing it at Ulquiorra's skull. Ulquiorra casually slapped the sword away, too late seeing Orochimaru activating a jutsu. "Gogyo Fuin," he declared, driving his hand into Ulquiorra's side. The sting of the chakra flooding his system flared through his body. He stumbled back, his eyes narrowing and his lips tightening further than normal. Despite his appalling chakra levels, the attack still hurt, and due to the limitations of the mortal body his already minuscule chakra vanished. This slowed his body slightly, and in this battle speed was everything. He hissed at Orochimaru, who simply grinned. "Well now, it seems I hurt you. Well, let's see if you can return the favor." Ulquiorra glared at him and sped forward, hacking at him with quick, vicious strikes. Orochimaru blocked again and again, their blades meeting with small explosions of force. Despite his reduced speed, Ulquiorra slowly began to gain the advantage. Suddenly, when their swords next met, Murcielago cut clean through the kusanagi, slicing it in twain, before it carried through its arc and decapitated the stunned Orochimaru. The severed head bounced on the ground, blood running from the cut flesh. Ulquiorra started as from the severed neck burst a horde of snakes and reformed into Orochimaru. "Just like Sasori and Kurosaki, you are obscenely hard to kill," Ulquiorra commented. Orochimaru smiled at him, licking the strange mucus that covered his skin from his shedding techniques. "Yes, Sasori was always a hard one to deal with. And who, may I ask, is Kurosaki?" "A fool. Now, let us end this." Orochimaru smirked and hurriedly completed a series of hand seals, crying out, "Futon! Ten no Habi Sutoraiku no Jutsu!" Heavenly Serpent Strike. 3 long serpentine forms made out of high-pressure air spun from his hands and struck at Ulquiorra. Despite his hierro, he lost a hand due to the incredible strength of the assault, though he managed to avoid the others. Orochimaru seemed even more interested in Ulquiorra's regeneration. "This stranger is incredible. If I can, I must take him back to Otogakure." Ulquiorra pursed his lips. "It seems I have no choice." His power at this point is comparable to Kurosaki once he had put on that mask. The wind tugged at their clothes and hair as the two of them gazed coldly at each other. "Farewell, Orochimaru. This is the end." He pointed Murcielago to the earth and closed his eyes for a moment, concentrating, before he opened them and murmuring. "In close, Murcielago." The earth shuddered and splintered beneath his feet. Green and black flames surrounded him, wreathing him in energy as green rain fell from the heavens. Orochimaru stumbled back from the sheer weight of the incredible Ryotsu, though he didn't know what it was. The trees cracked and shattered all about them and animals and birds fled in terror, while those too slow to escape were killed by the insane pressure. The cracks in the earth yawned wider and wider until a deep ravine hung beneath Ulquiorra. When at last the smoke and Ryotsu cleared, Ulquiorra stood in mid-air, his Primera Etapa form resplendent in the sun. Orochimaru gazed in naked wonder at him. His horned crown and black tears, his all-body robe of purest white, his wide coal-black wings. "Who are you?" he managed to croak out. "I am Ulquiorra, now die." Orochimaru felt something punch him in the gut, and he vomited blood. Ulquiorra had Sanidoed in front of him and driven his fist into his belly. He drove his hand in deeper, and powered his fist upwards, flinging Orochimaru into the sky like a rocket. He shot after him, appearing above the Sannin and kicking him back to earth and creating a wide crater in the forest from the impact. Orochimaru coughed up more blood, feeling many of his shattered bones piercing his flesh before he vomited a new form up again. He had barely the time to recover before Ulquiorra slapped him away with a wing. He crashed into the dirt, kicking up dirt. Ulquiorra summoned up a Luz de la Luna and cast it after the shinobi, impaling him. Orochimaru howled in pain and fell back, gripping the spear and trying to wrench it from his body. Ulquiorra glided over to him and looked down coldly at him. "Where is your base, Orochimaru?" Orochimaru spat at him and tried to stand. Ulquiorra stamped on his leg, shattering his knee, and splintering the bones until they cut the leg to pieces from within. "My patience is running low. Answer the question." There came the sound of steel meeting a mountain's flank. Ulquiorra looked over his shoulder to see Kabuto standing behind him with his fist broken and coated with chakra. He looked a little bruised from his earlier flight, but not too bad. Ulquiorra blinked owlishly before grabbing him by the throat. "Survive this, Kabuto." He threw Kabuto away, sending him sailing through the air at tremendous speed, crashing through the trees and landing beyond sight in the forest. "Your protégé is gone, Sannin." Orochimaru managed to stand at last, flinging out a horde of snakes, using them as whips to attack him. Ulquiorra ripped them to pieces with his hands, or cut them to shreds with Luz de la Luna, trying to battle his way through to Orochimaru. The snakes curled about Ulquiorra, spitting out blades in an attempt to harm him, though they were as effective as flies stinging a bear. He was a whirlwind of carnage, slicing the snakes to pieces. Blood stained the earth as Ulquiorra hacked the snakes to ribbons as he made his way towards Orochimaru. Finally, the serpentine sea parted, revealing Orochimaru. The Sannin had just finished a jutsu seal and unleashed it. Futon. Daitopa. Ulquiorra frowned at the huge blast of air. He stood still as the blast drew near. It surprised him when he was blown back away. Orochimaru still has some venom to his fangs. Orochimaru, sensing an opportunity, performed a partial transformation, morphing his lower body to that of a snake's tail. He summoned up the Kusanagi blade, fully repaired, probably due to his regeneration jutsu, Ulquiorra mused. He slithered towards him at an impressive speed, swinging his sword at his head. Ulquiorra blocked it with his arm, but his eyes widened as Orochimaru smiled and underwent another transformation. His sclera darkened, his eye markings widened and reached down along his neck and down to his shoulders. "Hubby Senin Modo, Ulquiorra. I think I'm more than a match for your Komori Senin Modo." "You think this is a transformation jutsu? It's a Kekkei Genkei. Wonderful. I'll be able to keep it once you're dead." "I doubt that, Orochimaru." Ulquiorra felt his skin being cut by the sword in Orochimaru's hand and summoned a Luz de la Luna, striking at Orochimaru. Once again they entered into a frantic and vicious duel, their weapons clashing again and again. At several points they scored deep wounds against the other, but their regeneration swiftly dealt with that problem. Ulquiorra cut Orochimaru in twain time and time again, but he constantly rebuilt his body. Ulquiorra at last, growing tired at the constant battle, grabbed Orochimaru's tail and hurled him into the sky, letting him fall to the ground again and snap his back. Orochimaru, still conscious, managed to vomit up another body. "This is getting ridiculous," muttered Ulquiorra as Orochimaru gathered himself for another attack. At least Sasori had the decency to die when he had been cut down. Orochimaru tittered. Though he didn't look it, he was exhausted. The constant regeneration and use of jutsus was wearing him down. He gave himself 2-3 minutes tops before he had to flee. "I grow tired of this," Ulquiorra whispered, pointing a finger at Orochimaru. "This will annihilate you. Nothing will remain, Orochimaru." The black orb gathered about his fingertip, wreathed in green light. The dense Ryotsu gathered, condensing further and further, till it was the size of a small marble. Sero Ascuras. There was a moment of silence, then the blast shot out, an ebony lance garbed in emerald. The air around it was warped, and the earth scarred in its path. Orochimaru reacted instantly, sensing the technique's power. Kachiyose. Sanju Rashomon. The three great gates appeared before Orochimaru, one red, one green, the third blue, blocking the Sero's path. The blast struck the first gate. It held for a heartbeat or so, before shattering into dozens of pieces. The second held it back a bit better, but it too fell. The third stood for a full minute before succumbing to the attack. Orochimaru screamed as the black and green light enveloped him, stripping skin from flesh, flesh from bone and vaporizing organs and blood, burning bones to ash. Soon, only a dark streak covered the earth where Orochimaru once stood. Ulquiorra lowered his hand and sighed quietly. It had been harder battling Orochimaru than Kurosaki and Sasori. His resurrection dissipated, leaving him standing in his Suna attire. He let out a long breath, relieved. He had hoped to find Orochimaru's hideout, or Otogakure, but he would settle for the former Konoha Nin's execution. It was then he noticed the small white snake coiled on the floor, looking at him. He blinked owlishly at it. If he had been in his previous incarnation he would be swearing, jumping up and down on the snake and gnawing it apart. As it was, he said, "This is beyond ridiculous." The snake began to convulse, before it began to vomit out more and more snakes until there were hundreds of them, twisting this way and that, until they fused together into a great colossus of a serpent, a conglomeration of hundreds of living snakes fused together, with a coarse black mane and a beige snout and amber eyes. "Orochimaru, you are a hard man to kill," he said. "Likewise," hissed the Titan. "But this battle proves it. Even if your body rots away in 3 years, I'll have regeneration on par with one of the kami, and that wonderful Kekkei Genkai." He drew back his head and roared. "Fushi Tensai." Ulquiorra started and raised his sword as Orochimaru struck at him, his mouth wide open. Ulquiorra swept his sword at the creature, but suddenly, the world vanished, almost as if he had been swallowed by the beast. He stood in a dark plain, surrounded by strange intestine-like objects that swarmed over dozens of others. He looked down and saw others covering him. "What on earth are these things?" "This is the power of the Shirohebe no Chikara," cried Orochimaru behind him. Ulquiorra looked over his shoulder and saw Orochimaru a little way off, covered in the same intestine-like mass. "I need a new body, and yours is just right, Ulquiorra. I'll take that body and warp it. I'll conquer the world with your Kekkei Genkai. You'll be the weapon I'll wield to destroy all my enemies." Ulquiorra couldn't help it. Never in his life had he done this. He rolled his eyes and smirked. "You ripped the soul from the body, yes?" "Yes." A strange change was coming over the mass of flesh. It was swarming over Ulquiorra, and he knew this was what ripped the soul from the body. "I see." He ripped away the flesh mass and before Orochimaru's petrified gaze walked across the landscape. Where he walked the world paled to an opaque white tinged with green. Ulquiorra stood over Orochimaru as he turned paler and paler. "I am beyond your power, Orochimaru. I am no mortal man." And he showed his hollow hole. "I am the result of hundreds of thousands of souls fused together. I devoured souls to survive. I didn't think I would eat any more, but..." He reached out and tore Orochimaru's eyes from his head. "I must say, this is satisfying," he continued over the Sanin's screams. Ganzui. The inner plane resounded to the sound of screams for hours. Ulquiorra woke up in the real world not long later. He looked down at the twisted snake and sniffed derisively. Trash. He had decided that he would collect the bounty on Orochimaru. The enormous sum of money would help him to live in the shinobi realm. He looked at the sky. It seems despite the amount of time it took to absorb Orochimaru and free all those souls within him, only an hour has passed since our duel ended. He had surprised himself. He could have kept the souls Orochimaru had taken within him, and their powers maybe. But, he shook his head and pinched the bridge of his nose. These human mannerisms were out of character, but then again, he was irked, and he had done them before. He felt different. He entered the deepest epicenter of his inner world and found a strange anomaly. His chakra was a mix of his and Orochimaru. He couldn't use jutsu, but he could access many of Orochimaru's secrets through this passive power. He couldn't have been more surprised if Kurosaki had turned up, claimed to be the Yondaime Hokage reincarnated and was here to return the power of the Kyuubi to him. He turned to look over his shoulder at the sound of laughter. What is so funny? That train of thought, Ulquiorra-kun. Imagining Kurosaki appearing and doing all of that. Ulquiorra frowned at him. Naruto giggled and ruffled his hair. Why are you so surprised? I have eaten an incomparable number of souls, and only half-forgotten memories have been absorbed. Never energy. Yeah, but this isn't the Shinigami realm. Different rules, as you have said before. As before, he had many of Orochimaru's memories, and the least said about them the better. What is it? Naruto was at his side, worried and concerned. Orochimaru's memories. I can see what he did, the locations of his bases, every thought. He is gone. I completely destroyed him. But, now, I have his chakra and his memories. He looked at the horizon and nodded once. I must go. There is one now, whose skills might prove invaluable to me. Naruto smiled. So you're going to free them? Ulquiorra said nothing, merely stepping away and vanishing into the distance. He was ignorant of Kabuto, lying in a pool of his own blood, staring after him, his eyes dark and livid. Ulquiorra looked at the huge blank slate of rock. Behind it stood Otogakure, or at least a part of it. He walked towards the hidden seal and forced some of his chakra into it. The flank of the cliff shuddered and a small door opened in the stone. He walked within and looked about the tunnel. It was dark and dank, and went down at a steep, steady incline. Ulquiorra walked forward, his eyes scanning the path ahead. Finally, he came to a wide open cavern, within which was a statue of a snake with candles for eyes. He looked around and saw many passages leading off from the room. He walked down one, following the memories. He came to a small laboratory. There was a large table in the center, strapped to which. He looked at the little girl. She must have been only 5 or 6, and felt a cold anger rising. He slowly undid her restraints and whispered, "Girl. Girl, wake up." Her face was a mess of scars and her eyes were closed over empty sockets. A pair of green eyes floated in a nearby tank. As for her body, it was malnourished and twisted. Bloodied surgical equipment littered the room as well as various strange machines, the purpose of which was clear to see. A soft whimper escaped her lips. "No more, please, I'll be good, don't touch me, don't." "Girl," Ulquiorra said gently, taking her hand. "He's gone. He won't hurt you again. I'm a friend." The girl tried to curl up and away from him. How to explain it to a child? "Please, child. Orochimaru, the snake man, is dead. I killed him. I'm going to take you home." The girl stopped for a moment. The only sound was the sound of chemicals bubbling and the drip of what Ulquiorra hoped was water, but knew to be otherwise. Home? To Kiri? Yes. To Okasan? She sounded so small and frightened. Yes. He felt some odd sting in his eyes. "No more. No. Please," she whispered, suddenly holding out her hands to him. He picked her up and hugged her close as he left. There was priceless information here. A wealth of information that could help him greatly. Orochimaru's huge stockpile of jutsu and whatever he had here. But he had the memories, and they were more than enough for his purposes. He wrapped a blanket round the girl and left the complex, firing a Sero behind him and erasing it from history. "What is your name, child?" It was raining. The girl seemed to be luxuriating in the feel of the cold water against her skin. "Terumi Rin," she replied, a small smile on her lips from the freedom. "I am Ulquiorra. I have a special Kekkei Genkei, Rin. I can move very fast. It might make you feel ill. Are you ready to move? You have a Kekkei Genkei too?" "Yes. Is that why?" "Yeah." She snuggled closer to him, her hands clasped to his shirt. Ulquiorra nodded and with that they left. "Wow," she yelled as they moved. "This is great, we're going really fast." "Yes, Rin." She was happy at least. A few days later, Ulquiorra stopped outside Kiri. Rin had hardly left his arms, safe to relieve herself. She had gorged herself on a boar Ulquiorra had killed. She had eaten more than him if it were possible. She reminded him a lot of Naruto, cheerful, sweet, tortured. He felt protective of her. He wondered who her mother was. She has a Kekkei Genkei, so she must be important. "Onichan, will you stay in Kiri?" she murmured as they drew near to the gates. "No." He looked down at her. Orochimaru was hurting others. I have to free them. Despite her missing eyes, her tear ducts still remained. He brushed away a tear. His gentleness surprised him. I'll return though. I promise, Rin. Okay. She sniffed and tried to put on a brave face. They moved across the waters and through the mists, until a large set of gates stood before them. At least 60 guards stood there, armed and armored to the teeth. At their head was a woman with long red-brown hair and green eyes, in her late 30s and dressed in mourning. Ulquiorra slowed as he drew near. Who goes there? Called the woman. Her face was haggard and worn and there were deep bags under her eyes. Rin started in his arms. Okasan? The woman froze and the force stood still. Ulquiorra looked at the woman again. Is Terumi Rin your kin? The woman looked as if she had seen a ghost. She walked towards them, her breath harsh and erratic. She stood before him and looked at Rin. She gave a shriek, part joy, part horror. Rin, she cried, grabbing the child and holding her close. Rin, my baby. The shinobi gathered behind her calmed and relaxed, but as they saw what had happened to Rin they paled and looked uneasy. Oh, Rin, sobbed the woman as her child clung to her in joy. I was so worried. Mother's here now, don't worry. Ulquiorra couldn't help it. He smiled thinly. It was a sad, strange smile. He wiped away some of the moisture from the mist off his cheek. After a few minutes of crying and whimpering, Rin's mother looked up at him. A wide smile plastered to her face, despite her red eyes and tear-streaked face. Thank you, so much. I can never hope to repay your kindness for bringing her home. Ulquiorra bowed in reply. Who did this? She whispered, stroking Rin's face as she cried. Orochimaru. He is dead. The shinobi all started. Dead? Yes. Was it? At the time I hadn't seen Rin, though I knew his nature. Forgive me, but it wasn't quite what he deserved. But believe me, hell has no place for him. She nodded grimly. I am Terumi Mei, the Godem Mizukage. Ulquiorra bowed again. I am glad to have helped, Mizukage-sama. I am Cypher Ulquiorra. Mei kissed Rin's brow and looked back up at him. Please come in, Ulquiorra-san. No, I insist. Please, please, Onichan. Everyone blinked at Rin, who held out her paw-like hand towards where Ulquiorra's voice came from. Ulquiorra looked silently down at the little hand, then took it in his own. All right, for a little while, at least. Ulquiorra sat in the Mizukage's office, his hands in his pockets as he looked towards the inner sanctum, the Mizukage's personal rooms. It was quiet in here, unlike the rest of the village, which was in the midst of merrymaking after the return of the Mizukage's daughter. The doctor and Mei had entered with Rin and several other medic nin a little over an hour ago. He had been sitting patiently watching the door since then. One of the cage's bodyguards, a young man with one of the 7 swords of the hidden mist and sharpened teeth that reminded him strongly of the other swordsmen he had met, was standing by the door, looking very uncomfortable. He cleared his throat eventually. Cypher-san, what were you doing hunting down Orochimaru? Ulquiorra waved a hand. I was hunting him for personal vindication. They lapsed into silence. A little while later Mei returned, her eyes moist and her makeup smudged. Ulquiorra bowed his head in respect as she sat down opposite him. When? Months, if not years. She shook her head, and cradled her face. What was it like there? What were the conditions? Ulquiorra was blunt as ever. She was strapped to a table, evidently for some time. Her eyes, were they green, like yours? Yes, they were bottled, floating in a tank. The room was filled with surgical equipment, bloodied. Pieces of her flesh were stored in various jars. Urine and feces were all over the floor. I estimate 3 or 4 months in the room all in one go. Evidence suggested little to no use of anesthetic. Drugs were probably used to keep her mind intact post-torture. Enough. Please, Mei begged. She's been gone a whole year, she sobbed. Why couldn't we? She stopped, unable to continue. How did she vanish? A diplomatic mission. A group of Konoha nin came here a year ago. During one of the meetings, a Konoha nin grabbed Rin and escaped. It later turned out it was an Otto nin, working for him. An entourage of Konoha nin enters Kiri and one of them is revealed to be in Orochimaru's pay? After the invasion of Konoha, some sort of security must have been in place to discover imposters and their ilk. It would be stupid not to. Thus, still, he couldn't see Konoha making a deal with Orochimaru. Then again, he hadn't seen his former friend executing him. Perhaps, Mizukage, may we speak in private? Mei nodded and waved a hand at the swordsman who left, glancing back in worry as he did so. What is it, Ulquiorra? What does the Keke Genke your family possess? The Uton and the Futon. Why, they are powerful Keke Genke. That explains Orochimaru's interest in Rin. But, why hide among the Konoha Nen? That line of enquiry has given me many sleepless nights. When Rin was taken, it was all I could do to not declare war on Konoha for the assault. I see. The fact that the Oto Nen hid among the Konoha Nen proves that someone in Konoha has at least dealings with. They're responsible. May I finish? Thank you, Mizukage-sama. The plan might only be known to a select few in Konoha, the Kage say, and they would have to possess something Orochimaru would desire. The great dojutsu, said Mei. Her anger was still fresh, but was now turning to venom as well. Yes, the Sharingan and the Byakugan. Yes, a branch member, or some form of DNA. Orochimaru and Konoha gain a powerful weapon apiece. Mei shook her head. Her mind boggled from the implications. She shook her head. Bastards. I'll kill them all. Get in line. Ulquiorra frowned at Naruto. Mizukage-sama, how would you react if I were to say that I am about to wage a war on Konoha? Yes, I am but one man. I do need allies. Kiri is strong and powerful. Will it join me? You wear the garb of Suna, but you are not a Suna Nen? No. Then Gaara-kun didn't tell you? Suna and Kiri are in Konoha's pockets. Without the money they shove into our economy every few months, our villages would collapse. Besides, we have no Jinchuriki. The Sanbi has long since gone. Yes, I know the dangers. But nevertheless they will be exterminated. Temari-sama, please understand this. In order to defeat Konoha, all the other villages must join forces. I know. The doctor's words rang in her ears. Rape, torture, experiments? The images filled her mind. Orochimaru leering at her child, She looked up at Ulquiorra. There was a darkness in his eyes. He hated Konoha with every fiber of his being. There was an air of pain and sorrow about him, no emptiness. This boy, 10 years her junior at least, was willing to fight and die, while she wasn't. She stood and reached out with a hand. I'm sorry, Ulquiorra. Kiri is in no position to fight at this point. Please, some time. To think. She sounded broken and sad. They shook hands. Of course. Suna is also preparing. I tell you this to show I am not alone. Betray that to Konoha and you will regret it. Good. Now, with that out of the way, here. She presented him a long purple cape, with the emblem of Kiri on the back. I know I can never repay you for what you have done. Protect Rin, don't abuse the people, and help me destroy Konoha and we'll be even. Mei grinned. You'll stay a little longer? Ulquiorra looked towards the bedroom where Rin rested. Just for a few hours. Rin was lying in a large bed. The covers pulled around her, her face quiet and tranquil. Her breathing was calm, but ragged. Her hands were clasped round a large soft blue and pink teddy bear. Ulquiorra stood over her, his hands in his pockets. He reached out and patted her head. She murmured in her sleep and curled deeper into the bed covers. Ulquiorra looked up to the other side of the bed at Naruto. Yes? What is it? She's so small. Naruto smiled at the little figure. Ulquiorra glanced between them and nodded. You're hardly one to comment on size. This coming from the late teenager who's only 5.5 feet. Touché, came the cold reply. Naruto grinned and stuck out his tongue. Ulquiorra glowered at him, then resumed his vigil. Rin would moan every now and then, muttering incoherently. He wondered how she would live. Without eyes she would have considerable difficulty in many situations. Though she might adjust and adapt, the torture could never be forgotten. Large, clumsy drawings covered the walls, butterflies and a woman and child. The young swordsman with a large blue sword standing atop a tree. A dancer moving among willow reeds. He looked back at her ruined face. So young and pure. She's a little like, I wonder. Mei opened the door. She had been waiting outside for a moment, having a word with the doctor. Ulquiorra was ripping one of his eyes from its socket and crushed it. Rather than gelatin and mucus and blood exploding from his fist, it turned to dust, though it was tinged with blood. Deep, inky, black blood. She started forward, though stopped as he lowered the fleshy mess to Rin's face, rubbing the mess into the ruined right eye socket. A faint glimmer appeared around the eyelid and tear duct, shining ever so faintly. Rin stirred fitfully and caught Ulquiorra's finger, moaning. Okasan? Ulquiorra patted her head gently and murmured, She's here, Rin. Mei, as if in a dream, walked forward and took her daughter's hand. A strange whiteness spread from the area around her eye and faded about the skin. Ulquiorra sniffed. I had hoped for more dramatic results. I don't suppose. He called out for the doctor. The medic Nin walked in and nearly fainted from the shock of seeing Ulquiorra's eye regenerate. Mei looked surprised herself. If you can resist the urge to faint, will you please pass me a needle and syringe? Thank you. He drove the needle into his arm and pressed on the plunger. Blood, thick and black, filled the instrument. He looked back at Mei. My DNA contains a powerful regenerative Kekkei Genkai. There is a chance it might work with Rin, but there is a chance it might not. The decision is yours. Mei looked between Ulquiorra and her child. Evidence from similar procedures existed. There was a strong chance that it might not do anything, or worse, her body would reject the transfusion and she could die. Mei began to cry. She couldn't decide. Rin stirred and moved towards her mother, folding into her embrace. Okasan, I trust Onichan. Mei hugged her child closer. Please. Ulquiorra nodded and without preamble pushed the needle into her skin. Rin cried and Mei hugged her tighter. Ulquiorra injected the black blood into her veins and removed the needle, watching the little girl closely. She shuddered and moaned and Mei exchanged a worried look with him. As they watched, her skin paled, a soft, downy white color fading in and out about her skin. Mei blinked and cried in quiet joy. Some of Rin's scars faded as her skin paled. But even as some of them healed, a few remained, and her eyes were still gone. But it was enough. Mei kissed her little girl's brow and smiled at Ulquiorra. Thank you, she whispered. Naruto smiled at Ulquiorra, who still looked glum at the results. With some of my DNA, perhaps a larger transfusion can take place. He reached up and the doctor and Mei flinched as he tore his right eye from its socket once more. Rather than crushing the organ, he lowered it to Rin's face, forcing the eye into her right socket. There was a strange shluck sound and the eye fluttered this way and that, and then. Okaasan. Rin screamed in a mix of fear and joy. Mei laughed in delight, kissing her daughter again and again. Ulquiorra reached up and tore his left eye out, and gently cupped her chin. She had barely a moment to see him before he had placed the eye in place. After a few moans and whimpers, Rin opened her eyes, sparkling green, to look upon her Ana-chan. Ana-chan, Ulquiorra wiped the blood from his face as his eyes regrew. Yes, Rin, it's me, Ulquiorra, she cried, leaping from her mother's arms to embrace him, tears flowing from their shared eyes. He looked so surprised and startled, it was almost comical. His eyes wide, his face frozen and his lips set. Naruto had chosen, now of all times, to vanish. How the hell was he meant to respond? Slowly, as if on autopilot, his arms rose and gently held her. It wasn't an embrace, but it was a close and gentle hug. Rin kissed him on the cheek and smiled at him, sniffing. Ulquiorra, already frozen in place, simply couldn't react. He stood as still as a statue and eventually Rin let go, smiling up at him through her tears. Thank you, Ana-chan, she murmured, nestling up to him like a cub. Think nothing of it, Rin, he replied, feeling uncharacteristically somber. He patted her head gently, pulling away. He looked at the two of them and inclined his head. Forgive me, but I must go. Rin started to sob, and huge tears gathered in her eyes as her lips quivered. Mei took her hand and pulled her close. I'll be back soon, Rin, I promise, he continued. But there are others like you. Rin nodded. Please, help them. Ulquiorra nodded his head and with a crackle of static he vanished. What did you do all that for? Silence. They were in Nami no Kuni once again, on an island, gray rock with little foliage. Ulquiorra was searching for a large complex Orochimaru had built here many years before. It was set deep into the rock of the island, behind huge doors of heavy steel, under a huge rock lip of a large cliff. Naruto had been following him for hours, badgering him with the same question again and again. They both knew why he had helped Rin, and he was damned if he would admit it. Pushing through the forest he came across the doors. He looked over it and reached out with his pesquisa. He sensed a large amount of chakra behind the gates, leading him to assume that Orochimaru had a significant number of people behind the gates. Sensing no danger in the immediate vicinity, he walked forwards and up to the huge gates, each one several times as high as him. All about the gates were small mounds. Little imagination was required to realize that they were graves. He laid his hand on the doors and sent a small sliver of chakra into the metal. Recognizing Orochimaru's signature, the doors swung inwards, revealing a long, wide, brightly lit tunnel of brick, turning to the right. He strode along the passageway, loosening Murcielago slightly. As he walked onwards, he sensed a large number of people ahead. Large cells came to view, packed with men, women and children. He looked up and down the packed masses. A small voice spoke up. "Who are you?" Another voice told the first to be silent. "I am Ulquiorra. I'm here for a woman by the name of Karen, a former servant of Orochimaru." Instantly, everyone shrank back. Gaunt faces and fear-filled eyes gazed at him in fright. Ulquiorra looked at them curiously. Am I to take it that He looked ahead at the red-haired figure that appeared down the passageway. "I take it that this is Karen?" He was startled by the hair. He had heard a little of the Uzumaki clan from Jiraiya, and from her hair, she was one. She glared at him. He remembered the look the Onna often. A stubborn look, a grim look. "Former," she asked, placing a hand on her hip and thrusting out the opposite side. Ulquiorra nodded. "He is dead." A murmur ran through the crowds. It spread like a ripple until it became a whisper, talking and then cries. Karen stood still as stone, her face pale, then, surprising all except Ulquiorra, burst out laughing. "Oh, come on. Orochimaru, dead?" A nod. "And I suppose you saw it happen?" "I killed him myself." Karen smirked, then broke into a fresh peal of laughter. She wiped her eyes and slapped her thigh. Oh, that's a good one. "Seriously, you killed Orochimaru? You couldn't cut your way out of a..." Ulquiorra drew his sword and sonidoed forward, cutting a single lock of her long red hair from her scalp and offering it to her. "Are you sure of that?" She took the hair and scampered away in fright. The prisoners were silent now, watching intently. "How could I get in, without some of Orochimaru's chakra?" "How, Karen, could I have some of that?" "Impossible," she whispered, shaking her head. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes could not disguise her turmoil and doubt. Ulquiorra reached up and tore his eye from his socket and crushed it, revealing the memories of Orochimaru's demise. The prisoners were silent as statues, and then began to cheer and cry in joy and relief, tears welling from their eyes. Karen on the other hand fell on her rump and gripped the wall, tears welling up in her eyes. Ulquiorra looked up and down the rows of prisoners. "Your master is dead, and, if I am not mistaken," he waved to the prisoners, "they will kill you when I release them." The cheers took on a bloodthirsty edge and the prisoners reached out with clawed hands towards her. She shrank away, and Ulquiorra knelt before her, offering her a hand. "However, free the prisoners and pledge loyalty to me, and I swear no harm will befall you." Karen looked at him with her blood-red eyes, surprise and confusion clouding her eyes. "Why?" she asked, stunned. "Orochimaru's memories show you have skill and I find myself in need of help. These are your options, help me." Then he pointed to the prisoners, "or stay here." Karen blinked at him. "That's no choice at all. Join your leader's murderer or remain loyal to his memory. That is a choice." Karen looked hard at him for a moment, lingering on his eyes. "Well, at least he has some brains and is good-looking." She reached up, and pulled a hidden lever in the rocks and then, with surprising agility, leapt clean over Ulquiorra, and hunkered down behind him, using him as a barrier between her and the prisoners. As they filed out, Ulquiorra inclined his head to them. "Go. You are free. Suna or Nami no Kuni will welcome you." One of the prisoners stepped forward and bowed. "Thank you, whoever y'all are. I am Ulquiorra." The prisoners fled, looking back at Karen with naked hatred. Once they had all left, Ulquiorra stood and turned to Karen. She looked at him appraising Ly. He was a few centimeters taller than her and he looked fairly handsome. At least she wasn't stuck with a bumpkin. "Well," she said, a light tone of flirtation to her voice, sticking out a hip and biting her lip. "What now, Ulquiorra?" Ulquiorra frowned at her attitude. It stirred something though he didn't know what. "Are there any guards or jailers or the like in this place?" "Other than me? Only a few. Call them in." Karen frowned, but nodded, sending out a chakra pulse to gain the attention of the guards. They arrived shortly afterwards, clearly unnerved by the presence of Ulquiorra and the lack of prisoners. "I am Ulquiorra. Orochimaru is dead, by my hand. The prisoners are free. Karen is now my subordinate. Leave now and never harm another. Or else, join your former liege." While most turned sickly and ran, a few remained, but they were swiftly slain. Now, Karen, he said, turning back to her, cleaning his hand on a corpse. Your oath. She nodded. I, Karen of Clan Uzumaki, do solemnly swear to serve you loyally, Ulquiorra. Good. Break that oath, and you will die. Karen smiled thinly as they left. He was smart, ruthless, handsome, and most interestingly, he had spared her. He seemed a good catch. He took her shoulder and her smile widened. It was so romantic. What the hell was that? My keke genke, speed and regeneration, as evidenced by this travel in my eye. Now be silent. That constant reaction is rather taxing. He sat down on a rock and looked at her. They were back on the mainland of Hai no Kuni, by the mouth of the stream to the sea. She continued to glare at him. I would advise you to sit and relax. The movement can be most. She vomited over his shoes. He sniffed and walked to the sea and washed his shoes. I recently saved a little girl, 6 years old, from the Kusagakure hideout. She did not vomit on me. Well, excuse me, my lord, she huffed. I haven't left that hideout in 2.5 years. Ulquiorra nodded and looked at her. She was about 16, a little older, maybe, than Hinata. Karen noticed his eyes linger on her, but it was not the hungry look that she was accustomed to. It was almost as if her image reminded him of someone. She smiled at him, biting her lip and crossing her legs in a sultry fashion. So, who is she? Who? He was surprised by the keenness of her mind. The girl who I remind you of. She grinned at his discomfort. Never you mind. He looked to the northeast. The next one I wish to enlist is Hazuka Suigetsu. Him. Why? I take it you do not like Hazuka? No. He is insubordinate, rude, and a prisoner of Orochimaru. I would not imagine many prisoners being polite when under his care. That silenced Karen. She looked awkward. At any rate, the journey to the eastern hideout will take many days. I cannot carry the both of us all the way there without considerable stress. We will have to walk. Karen nodded. It could be worse. For the next 7 days, they walked, stopping at small villages and towns to eat and sleep. Ulquiorra's skill at hunting and Karen's sensor powers helped to hunt and detect bandits when Pesquisa didn't work. At times, they slept beneath the sky, watching the stars. Ulquiorra found that, despite her flirtatious attitude, she was smart and an interesting companion. She at least was smart enough to tolerate. And she herself found that, despite his cold and impassive exterior, he was, well, generous, and kind, to an extent. On the 6th night, Karen was watching him over the fire that they had made in a small cave to shelter from the rain, when, shivering from the cold and wet, he had taken of the cloak and passed it over the flames. She wrapped it round herself and smiled gratefully. So, what is she like? It was their ritual. Every night she would ask the same question and he would give the same answer. It is none of your concern. The next day, they stood before the eastern hideout. Ulquiorra looked at it in some confusion. Karen, the memories are unclear. How do we enter? The gate is over there. She looked at him worriedly. We don't really need to get him, do we? Whatever you want from him, I can do better. The withering glare he sent her told her to stop. She nodded and with a sigh, walked away, pulling him after her. She still wore the cape round her shoulders and she pulled it tighter about herself for protection as they entered the den. Specimens lined the wall and torches flickered in the tunnels. They walked through laboratories and cells and found only corpses. I can sense no life here. Is it the same with you? Yes, Ulquiorra. Orochimaru must have killed them all. Though, this place was mainly for his Fushi Tensei. Prisoners were not kept here. Ulquiorra nodded as they made their way deeper into the lair. Finally, they came down into a deeper corner of the lair, filled with tanks of water. Hazuka Suigetsu, where are you? Karen jumped as an eye appeared, floating in the tank beside them. Looking over them, a face appeared in the water. Violet eyes glared at them. Well, ya bastard, what do you want? To free you. And so saying, Ulquiorra smashed the tank. Suigetsu, a comical expression of surprise on his face, fell out and solidified into his human form, standing in a pool of water, stark naked. Karen blinked and looked away. Suigetsu stretched and grinned at Ulquiorra. So, thanks, whoever you are. Well, I guess ya don't work for Orochimaru. No, I killed him. Suigetsu whistled. Nice. Did it hurt? I would imagine so. Good. So, what can I do for you? Put some clothes on, you fool. Yelled Karen, interrupting, her eyes wide and angry. Suigetsu rounded on her and recognized her. You bitch. Shut up you bastard. Go fu. Silence. The mere word had them both cowering at the applied ryotsu emanating from Ulquiorra. He looked at them coldly. Karen, be still. You swore to serve me loyally, and I will not tolerate this behavior. He turned to Suigetsu. I have saved you for more than simple generosity. I desire your aid. Suigetsu frowned and grit his teeth. Holding up one finger, he spat, I owe ya, but give me one reason to help you. Ulquiorra's eyes narrowed as Suigetsu's body began to morph and flow, turning into a gelatinous watery state and growing in size as he absorbed the spilt water. Muscles grew and swelled larger and larger until he was a huge beast with giant muscles and a sneering, crooked visage. How do you intend to fight against my Suika no Jutsu? By beating you bloody. He sonidoed behind the former prisoner and fired a bala into the water. Suigetsu and Karen started. To them it was a blast of pure energy. And energy is heat. The heat led to some of the water evaporating, and Suigetsu yelled in pain. He flailed about as bala after bala hit the mass and parts began to disappear. Finally, Suigetsu threw up his hands in surrender and screamed out, okay, please stop. I give up. Ulquiorra stopped and Suigetsu solidified, breathing hard. He didn't seem to be missing anything, apart from maybe a few pounds. Ulquiorra looked over at Karen. My Kekkei Genkei has the power to release energy in various methods. Now, Suigetsu, your aid. Suigetsu lay, panting, in the water, looking at Ulquiorra in awe and fright. Fine, he finally ground out. But what do I get? Whatever you desire. Yes, that goes for you too as well, Karen. He looked at the both of them. I require your aid, but I know that, while I can force your loyalty, you would be better allies as willing soldiers. Suigetsu pursed his lips. Well, if I refuse, you just kill me or something. And I guess I owe ya twice. Orochimaru's dead and I'm free. Fine, I'll join ya. But, he raised a hand, for my payment, I want your help to find the 7 swords of the hidden mist. Ulquiorra looked at the sealing scroll at his hip. Why? My brother, Mangetsu, was a member. The way he spoke of his brother and the swords, Ulquiorra was sure of his honesty. He pulled out the scroll and looked at it critically. I see. I offer you down payment. He opened the scroll and removed the Kabikirabocho and tossed it to Suigetsu. He gazed at it with a look bordering on reverence. He reached out and touched it as gently as if it were a relic. He held it and gently ran a hand over the steel. He looked up at Ulquiorra and nodded his head. Very well. I'll join you. Good. Now, find some clothes. We have a long journey now, and I would rather not be forced to see you naked the entire time. Hazuka. Fuck that, you can call me Suigetsu. Very well. Suigetsu-san, if you do not control your stomach, I will force feed you pills to control your belly. Sorry, Ulquiorra, we'll walk from here. They spent the next 4 days or so walking northwest, traveling through Hai no Kuni. Ulquiorra had to devote all his willpower to resist the urge to throttle his companions. Grimmjow was never this annoying and he had thrown him into a Kaha negation. Suigetsu and Karen often argued, the former being a prisoner of the latter's master, would not lead to a friendly relationship. Every now and then, Suigetsu and Karen would begin to snap and snarl at each other like dogs over a bone. Ulquiorra would break up the argument with a few words and applied ryotsu. Despite this, there was a slight jovial attitude to the arguments. It seemed that, despite their animosity, the journey and their shared loyalty to Ulquiorra, as well as a healthy dose of fear of punishment, seemed to add a little bit of camaraderie to their feud. At night, Suigetsu and Ulquiorra would fence. Ulquiorra always won. His Arrancar strength and inhuman power made him a hardy foe, and as both he and Suigetsu shared a form of regeneration and hardness of flesh, through Hiero and Suika no Jutsu, both could go all out and from their battles, they both grew stronger. Karen would tend to any wounds that Suigetsu suffered, but steadfastly refused to allow him to bite her. Ulquiorra looked oddly at her when she described her powers. I know you can heal wounds from Orochimaru's memories, but what are its limits? Limitless. If I pour in enough chakra I can heal nearly all wounds, except amputation and the like. Good. Are there any adverse effects on you? Aside from the hundreds of permanent bite marks all over my body? A drain on chakra and that's about it. Wait, all over your body? Suigetsu-san, please. Karen flipped off Suigetsu. I can also only use it once a day. I see. Suigetsu and I will have to hold back in future to prevent you from exhausting yourself. She knew that it was only to prevent her from becoming a drain on their resources, but it was nice to know he valued her. Suigetsu rubbed the back of his head as they looked up at the castle built between the mountain peaks. It looked like a large palace, set with great gates of heavy metal. He looked at Ulquiorra and gestured his hand to the fortress. Hey, Ulquiorra, how are you going to get in? How everyone else does. Through the front door. Suigetsu blinked as Ulquiorra walked on ahead as if he owned the place. Then again, he does have some of Orochimaru's chakra. Ulquiorra waved for them to follow. Suigetsu glanced at Karen as they moved towards the lair. This, Jugo guy, who is he? Karen pushed her glasses further up her nose in the traditional, I'm smarter than you, so listen boy, pose. Jugo is the basis of all cursed seals. He comes from a clan with a Kekkei Genkei that allows them to constantly draw in natural energy, and morph their body through a sage transformation oomph. Ulquiorra had stopped dead and turned to her. She had bumped into him, with much the same results as a puppy hitting a wall at full pelt. He has sage transformation? Then he is even more useful than I had thought. Yes, well, there is a catch. Yeah? What is it? Suigetsu put in. He's psychotic. Ah, as in, yes. The natural energy he absorbs causes a negative imbalance of his mental state leading to frequent bouts of rage. He originally came to Orochimaru-sama to see if Orochimaru-sama could help him to learn how to control his anger. I take it he failed? They were nearly halfway to the gates, the plateaus and mountains looming higher and higher. Yes. Instead, Jugo offered his DNA for experimentation in exchange for a prison to keep himself from harming others. So he is so afraid of hurting others that he locks himself away? That will make it awkward in getting him to fight. Still, he couldn't let Jugo languish here, for both humanitarian reasons, and the sheer power he possessed. As they moved through the stone behemoths, Ulquiorra sensed a large number of souls begin to surround them. His hands still in his pockets were finally removed as he motioned to his comrades. There are 100 people surrounding us. However, they feel different to what humans normally feel like. Karen, can you tell what is different about them? Karen, reaching out with her Kagura Shingen, felt them and blinked. She pushed her glasses back up her nose and nodded. I should have realized it sooner. Orochimaru-sama would not have left this place unpopulated and unguarded. He had imbued the prisoners here with cursed seals. Doubtless, without any word from Orochimaru in what 2 weeks, the guards will be in some worry, and without a sufficient motivator, fear or reward, the guards are most likely dead or gone, and the prisoners have escaped. Or, more likely, the guards sensed this, and realizing we are not Orochimaru and have released the prisoners as attack hounds to help them deal with us, no doubt under some form of control. Suigetsu grimaced and picked his ear. Talk a lot, don't you? Go to hell. Ulquiorra silenced them with a glare and looked around. As if on cue, a horde of prisoners mutated into various releases of the cursed seals, behind which a small division of guards, dressed in the garb of Otogakure. Ulquiorra looked over the frothing and growling monstrosities and the guards. Stepping forward he called, I am in no mood for battle. I am Cypher Ulquiorra. I killed Orochimaru 2 weeks ago. Tearing out an eye and crushing it, he revealed the truth of the battle. The choice is yours. Guards, release the prisoners and flee. If I hear one whisper of former Otto Nen harming others, I will destroy you. The guards looked at each other in worry, then in ones and twos began to deactivate the jutsu enslaving the prisoners and vanishing into the distance as fast as their legs could carry them. A few remained and gently led away a prisoner or two apiece. Those who had bonded despite their barriers. The few remaining guards readied weapons. Suigetsu drew his sword and licked the edge of the blade. I wonder how that freak ever got such loyalty from Ya, but that doesn't matter. Ulquiorra, permission to deal with them as you wish. Ulquiorra walked through the crowd of prisoners, which parted gingerly for him, growling and snapping. A few of the more bloodthirsty ones, those driven insane from torture and experimentation or else were monsters to begin with, attacked him. He ripped heads from shoulders and snapped limbs like twigs. That put the fight out of the rest, and soon they fell on their erstwhile captors. Blood and innards flew into the air and scattered limbs covered the earth. Suigetsu admired the work of the former captives. They fought like demons. Karen stood back a ways from the carnage. She had never before been here, so she was not at an risk of dismemberment, but it still worried her that, were it not for her skills, Ulquiorra might have killed her. She sat on a rock and looked at the crowd as they quieted down. Suigetsu, grinning ear to ear, covered in blood and cuts, walked over to her and sat down beside her. Well, should we go and help him? Karen shrugged. Perhaps, but they watched as Ulquiorra entered the lair. I don't think we want to meet Jugo right now. You being covered in blood, as well as Ulquiorra-kun, I mean Ulquiorra-san, might send him into a rage. He is not called Jugo of the Scales for nothing. Part of the fortress exploded. Rocks and debris flew through the air like rain and great clouds of dirt and dust flew up where they landed. Suigetsu leapt to his feet and yelled, "What the fuck was that? I believe the scales have overbalanced." Ulquiorra frowned at the orange-haired young man, his huge, dark gray fist dragging on the ground, tearing deep ruts in the tiled floor. As he had walked through the lair, he had freed the few remaining prisoners, telling them to wait outside with Karen and Suigetsu, and executing the few remaining guards. He had finally come to the highest cell in the den, barred with a huge and heavy door. He had gauged its strength, before shattering it with a bala. From within, a deep grating voice had groaned out, "Who is it? Kabuto? Orochimaru? Please leave me, the anger is going to Jugo." The commanding tone silenced the voice. "I am Ulquiorra. Orochimaru is dead, by my hand. I desire your aid." Jugo was silent for a long time, and then, he slowly came into the light, his orange hair and eyes ruddy in the light. His hands were twitching, and a huge ball and chain was attached to his ankle. How he could move with that attached to him, even with his insane abilities, was beyond the Espada. Jugo looked at him coldly for a long while, before roaring in laughter. "Dead, dead, dead. The Sanin's gone. I'm gonna have some fun. Who to kill? Who to kill?" Ulquiorra frowned, deeply concerned by this rapid change. He would have his work cut out for him, containing this warrior. Who to kill? I know. Ulquiorra dodged the colossal fist as it mutated into a dark gray mass and crushed the wall. Ulquiorra walked steadily towards Jugo as he dragged his talons. "Jugo, stand down. I will use force, if necessary. Once I kill you, I'll kill a girl, then a boy, then a girl. I can see where you are going with this. Now, be silent." Using Sonido, Ulquiorra arrived behind Jugo and grabbed his neck. Jugo had a second to wonder what had happened before Ulquiorra flung him out the hole in the wall. He tumbled a good 60 feet, crashing into the earth and stone below. Ulquiorra leapt after him, landing and walking to the prostrate fellow. He kicked the man over and looked down at him. "Jugo, calm down." The earth broke apart slightly at the ryotsu he applied. Jugo's eyes, which had changed to gold and black, reminding Ulquiorra uncomfortably of a certain battle, changed back to a mellow orange. He looked at himself in wonder. "You calmed me?" "Yes. Only Kimimaro could do that before." Ulquiorra remembered the fierce bone-manipulating warrior and nodded. "I met him, not long before he died. I fought him, in fact." Jugo blinked and a small tear grew in the corner of one eye. "He was a fierce fighter and died well. Did he capture Uchiha Sasuke?" Ulquiorra blinked. The conversation awakened very old and loathed memories. "Yes." "Did Orochimaru?" "No. One of the Uchiha's allies, the Kyuubi Jinchuruki, recaptured his erstwhile friend. Little good it did him. He was executed in a farce to gain the Uchiha's loyalty to Konoha. By your tears, this was not what you desired. Kimimaro was meant to capture Uchiha Sasuke and bring him back to Orochimaru. He was going to be the next body, Kimimaro's last act of loyalty before he died." His eyes were darkening and his voice turned from a sorrowful moan to a growl of anger. Ulquiorra looked at him hard for a long while. "Orochimaru was my enemy. Uchiha Sasuke and Konoha is my enemy. I cannot offer you much, but I will offer this. I will control your fury for as long as you serve me. I will protect you. Sneer if you will, but there are many in this world that could harm you. I will offer you comradeship. I will offer you a chance to destroy Konoha." "What?" 3 voices asked at once. Karen, Suigetsu and Jugo stared at him. Suigetsu's jaw was working up and down and Karen and Jugo's eyes were wide and stunned. Ulquiorra stood and opened his jacket and pulled his shirt up, revealing his hollow hole. "You're dead," 3 voices cried. The former prisoners were returning to human forms and were looking about in confusion. "Yes." And he told them his story. When it was finished, the sheer evidence and the sincerity of his words convinced his comrades. Karen was crying and Suigetsu and Jugo were glum and somber. You came back? For revenge and love? Yes. Karen remembered the looks he had sent her whenever she had done something flirtatious, subtle or otherwise. He was doubtless remembering Hinata. She must be something else, she thought, how romantic. Ulquiorra felt decidedly awkward now and turned to the former prisoners. They hadn't heard the conversation, but were hovering nearby. He looked at them. Prisoners, you are free. Go where you will, but if you take my advice, head to Suna. The case cage is a friend of mine. Tell him Ulquiorra sent you. With many profuse thanks, they left, drifting through the labyrinth of rock and vanishing. He turned to the ragtag group. They looked at him with a mix of pity, fear and respect. In exchange for aid, I will grant you whatever you desire, if it be in my power. Name it. Jugo looked at him hard. Uchiha Sasuke betrayed Kimimaro, and you have the power to control my anger. I'll join you. Suigetsu smiled. You're going into a battle. As I said before, help me get those swords, and let me fight, and I'll help. Karen winked and smirked. You got my oath. I'll help you. Ulquiorra looked at them. His last team had been forced together by orders and tradition. They hid their natures behind masks. Here, everyone came to serve a single aim, and were honest of their goals. I suppose that, now we're a team, we need a name, Suigetsu said. Even Ulquiorra's withering glare could not dissuade them. Team Komori? Karen asked. Team Jigoku no Fukushu, Hell's Vengeance. Suigetsu put in. Team Yurei Komori, Ghost Bat, suggested Jugo. Tonda Kitsune, Winged Fox. Karen. Ulquiorra paused for a moment. Yurei Komori? Tonda Kitsune? He rolled the ideas around in his head, and found that it pleased him. Very well. A choice then, between Tonda Yurei and Komori Kitsune. And eventually, after much debate, though Ulquiorra remained ambivalent, it was decided. The name chosen was much simpler and more pleasing to their leader. Yurei walked out into the night, their eyes set on Konoha. But first, they had to collect a corpse.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.